On a desolate African savanna, an activity challenging the limits of human endurance is taking place. This pair of strangers, a man and a woman, are to survive here for a full 21 days. They have no food, no water, and not even any clothes. In the most primitive state, they throw themselves into this desolate grassland. Almost no one can successfully survive for 21 days. The production team drives and takes the two protagonists to the starting point of their journey. After the two have stripped naked, following the guidance, the pair of strangers come to a tree. From now on, as complete strangers, they will become partners, sharing life and death for the next 21 days. After a brief self-introduction, the two have gained some understanding of each other. The man is named E.J. He is a retired veteran, with rich wilderness survival experience, and is an extremely excellent survival contestant. The woman beside him is a wilderness survival expert and adventurer named Kelly, who is also highly accomplished in wilderness survival. After the two exchange pleasantries, this challenge officially begins. Before leaving, they find two packages under the tree. These are the initial props they were allowed to carry before the start of the activity. E.J. gets a sharp military knife. The importance of this thing in the wilderness should need no further elaboration. Kelly, on the other hand, brings a small pot, which can be used to handle water sources and food, and can even be used to dig holes when necessary. After confirming their props, the two, followed by a small filming crew, start this journey. Of course, E.J. and Kelly each also hold a small filming device to record from their own perspectives. So, first, the two now need to confirm their tasks. This challenge is not just about living on the African savanna for 21 days. The final exit is a small hill, 8 kilometers to the west. So starting from the tree at the departure point, for the next 3 weeks, they not only have to ensure their own survival, but also climb that hill within this time, and light a distress signal fire. Only then will the challenge be considered a success. After bidding farewell to the captain, the two set off. Of course, before participating in such an activity, a specialized agency conducts strict physical fitness tests on the two, and scores them based on experience, skills, and psychology. E.J., as an elite Marine in the past, scored high in terms of experience, but this challenge does not come with the excellent equipment provided by the military, so his overall score is only 7.3. Kelly, due to her long-term wilderness survival, also received a high score for experience, and as an adventurer, she is familiar with various plants. Therefore, her overall score is actually a bit higher than E. After this challenge, the two's scores will continue to rise, or fall. However, on the very first day of setting out on the journey, the two encounter significant trouble. The vegetation on the desolate savanna is mostly thorns and messy wild grass. Walking barefoot on such ground is no easy task. What's more, they need to find a water source as soon as possible. So, marching at a fast pace under such circumstances is simply unbearable. And while on the way, E.J. and Kelly have a minor disagreement. E.J., with a military background, has a clear goal and plans to head straight for the water source, but Kelly is different. This woman is familiar with various plants and has picked up a bagful along the way. In E.J.'s view, this behavior is undoubtedly slowing down the progress. He even teases Kelly, saying she is like a little squirrel storing food for winter. The two hobble forward on this vast savanna, and as the day approaches noon, the high temperature, coupled with the scorching sun, makes the two miserable. In just half a day, E.J. and Kelly, who came to the show with great ambition, have already been worn down by this savanna and lost their tempers. Without the protection of clothes, not long after leaving the starting point, they are already on the verge of exhaustion and dehydration. Seeing that it is already afternoon, the two must find a water source as soon as possible, or they may be in life-threatening danger. But in fact, the two are moving rather slowly. After trekking for a whole day, they have only found some small, foul-smelling and muddy puddles. They have no idea how many animals have defecated and urinated in these puddles, so no matter how thirsty they are, this kind of water is undrinkable. However, in the evening, the two not only find a cave, but also a real water source. The water here looks much better, but it still needs to be boiled before drinking, so now they just need to start a fire, and they can solve the urgent problem. But will things really go so smoothly? E.J. used the fire-starting skills he had learned in the Special Operations Unit to begin making a fire, but in fact, starting a fire using such primitive methods was extremely difficult, and 51 hours had passed since the challenge began. Without taking in any water for such a long time, the two were barely able to hold on physically, especially Kelly, who was slightly dehydrated and looked as if she was on her last legs. However, Through EJ's persistent efforts, on the evening of the third day, with a puff of smoke rising, they finally succeeded in lighting a fire. Thus, human civilization was born here. Then, the two couldn't wait to use the small pot that Kelly had brought, and started boiling water. In wilderness survival, it was a necessary act to boil water before drinking it. After 3 days, the two finally got to drink water, although the water in the pot looked quite murky. For E, J, and Kelly, who had been thirsty for days, this pot of water was incredibly delicious. With fire and water, the two finally resolved the life-threatening crisis. Next, they slowly began to scout out the path to the exit. Since they needed to drink a certain amount of water every day, the two moved at an extremely slow pace. Time slowly passed, and it came to the 5th day. The two were busily going about their usual tasks in their camp. But then something happened that directly drove them into a desperate situation days later. The thorns on the savannah had always been ferocious and terrifying. Moreover, now they had to move around constantly, to scout the way and search for firewood. So unfortunately, a thorn got stuck in EJ's soul. Although it was soon squeezed out by Kelly, it left a deep wound. The inconvenience in movement and the twists and turns of life made EJ extremely frustrated. Time came to the 8th day. A third of the challenge had passed. EJ finally remembered to make shoes. It was truly something to celebrate. Using the military knife, he cut off several pieces of bark, then cut them into appropriate sizes, and fixed them together with grass ropes. In this way, a pair of slippers that could resist thorns was made. With the help of the shoes, the two's range of activities directly expanded by 500 meters. However, after night fell, an even greater crisis presented itself to the two. On the savannah, the biggest threats to humans were not top predators like lions and cheetahs, but cruel and cunning hunting dogs. The two had occupied a spot near the water source, which made it very likely for them to encounter wild beasts. When the sound of hunting dogs was heard nearby, the two couldn't help but feel a bit flustered in their hearts. But fortunately, with the deterrence of the fire, this night passed without incident. Time came to the 9th day. In fact, since the challenge began, the two had hardly touched any protein, so now they had to plan to go hunting. At this point, they had no worries in the back of their minds, and only needed to supplement protein to fill their stomachs, so they began to search for small game on the savannah. As for large game, it was hard to say who would hunt whom. However, this was not a smooth process. EJ, who was used to hunting with tools, did not have enough patience to squat and wait with Kelly when it came to hunting bare-handed. The two had another disagreement. As a result, from the 9th day to the 12th day, they achieved nothing in 3 whole days. Without taking in protein for such a long time, the two's bodies had visibly become thinner, and hunger made them irritable, gradually straining the relationship between them. And on this day, Kelly collapsed. Long-term hunger and mental stress left her lying on the ground, unable to move. This was not good news for EJ. This state was a sign of giving up. So, in order to continue the challenge, EJ had a heart-to-heart talk with Kelly. After sending the filming crew away, EJ and Kelly sat around the fire and had an honest and fair chat. Through this conversation, Kelly regained her spirits. The bond between the two-person team became even closer. On the 13th day, the thorns from the previous few days dealt them a heavy blow. EJ's wound became infected. You have to know that in the wild, a wound infection basically spells a death sentence for a person. So Kelly, who could still move normally, took on the task of going out hunting, and EJ, who had limited mobility, stayed at the camp, hobbling around doing household chores. Traces of hunting dogs could be seen everywhere around this small camp, and when night fell, Kelly, who had gone out hunting, still hadn't returned. This woman had been squatting and waiting outside all day, and even encountered hunting dogs at night. However, thanks to Kelly's calm handling, she managed to shake off the hunting dog's pursuit without incident. When EJ, with a worried look on his face, saw Kelly return safely, he was extremely delighted. But on the 14th day, EJ's injury had become very serious. The infected area started to fester, and he almost lost the ability to move. And Kelly, due to being unable to take in enough energy for a long time, also lost her vitality. The small camp was filled with a gloomy atmosphere, but as the saying goes, heaven helps those who help themselves. When EJ hobbled over to get water, he suddenly saw that there were actually fish in this small fish pond. The two instantly became excited and started to catch fish. After a round of chasing and blocking, EJ came ashore with 3 small catfish. This was the first time they had obtained meat in half a month, and fish meat is the best food for supplementing protein. This meal of fish meat left the two extremely satisfied. Even without any seasonings, This fish meat in its original flavor tasted extremely delicious to them. Just after having a full meal, a greater crisis suddenly struck. On the 16th day, the wound on EJ's soul had deteriorated to an unbearable state. And that wasn't the worst part. Accompanied by a roll of thunder, large raindrops came crashing down. It actually started to rain. At this moment, they not only had to worry about their physical conditions, but also had to figure out a way to preserve the fire in this rain. If the fire was extinguished by the rain, then they would truly be done for. Kelly quickly found a cave to preserve the embers. However, if their body temperatures dropped too low after being soaked in the rain, they would still be in life-threatening danger. E.J., with limited mobility, came beside the cave to take care of the fire. Kelly stepped up and took charge of other aspects, but with a severely infected wound, even EJ was about to give up. At this point, the production team had to intervene, because if the wound infection led to sepsis, then EJ would truly be in life-threatening danger. However, after asking EJ, the production team learned that this man still didn't want to give up, so they planned to only provide him with medical assistance and let him continue to participate in the challenge after the treatment. So after a gruesome surgery, EJ, with bandages wrapped around his foot, came back to their small camp again. Their fire was still there, and EJ's foot could move again. They also had to start planning to set off, but the next day, they discovered an unexpected delight around their small camp. This small meerkat was their second meat meal in half a month. Although it looked like a small lump, for these two, this piece of meat was already a rare treat. After that, everything went without major mishaps. Time came to the 20th day. They still hadn't reached the exit, but there was only one day left, so they changed their strategy. They took the fire with them and headed straight for the exit. So EJ made a small rattan backpack and carried a bundle of hot embers that were still smoking towards the hill where the exit was located. The road was full of ferocious thorns and unbearable heat. What's more, EJ was carrying a backpack full of embers on his back. He felt like he was about to be roasted dry, but when night fell, the two also successfully arrived at the hill where the exit was. After setting up a temporary camp, they waited for everything to end the next day. But on this very night, another accident happened. Just before the challenge was about to end, and they were safe, people tend to be the most relaxed. So EJ, by the fire, fell asleep under the fatigue accumulated over the past half-month, and when he woke up, the fire had already gone out. At the last moment, if there was no survival signal, their challenge would still be considered a failure. So the two began a tense firefighting session. During this process, Kelly's hair even caught fire, but fortunately, they reacted in time, and no tragedy occurred. When the sun rose, it was finally the last day. The two came to the mountaintop and lit a bonfire. Looking at the helicopter in the distance, they knew the challenge was over. Recalling these nightmare-like 21 days, both of them were still shaken. But in the end, they supported each other and made it through. This is Cayo de Agua Island, in the northwest of Panama, a damp little island with constant heavy rain throughout the year. Sharks are everywhere outside the island, and the interior is filled with swamps. This is a paradise for caimans and various poisonous snakes. Today, a naked man and woman will enter here for a 21-day survival challenge. The woman is named Laura, an expert in primitive survival skills. Having taught countless people how to survive in the wild, she is confident and ready to conquer this Panamanian rainforest this time. The man is named Clint, not only a survival expert, but also a rural musician with a bourgeois taste. For this unfamiliar rainforest, both of them are filled with anticipation amidst their apprehension. For these survival experts, any survival challenge is a journey of self-discovery, let alone starting from scratch with everything stripped away. The two were sent to the vicinity of the island by speedboat. After undressing, they both landed on the shallow beach of the island. Amidst the rising and falling tides, this unfamiliar man and woman met. In the small grove beside the coast, they found their small cloth bags containing their initial equipment. Laura brought a military knife, the importance of which in the wild is self-evident. As for Clint, he brought a pair of swimming goggles, which might have his own uses, such as fishing near coral reefs. The two confirmed their portable filming equipment and then started looking at the map. Apart from surviving for 21 days, they still needed to reach another place to be rescued. This exit was near the northeast coast, located in the open sea. So, while ensuring their survival, they also had to make a bamboo raft to reach the open sea. And a few kilometers northwest of them was a swamp area marked with an abundance of caimans, the most suitable place on the island for a campsite. So now, they had to trek from this dangerous jungle by the sea all the way to the swamp to set up camp. On the first day of their departure, the two, who were stumbling and bumbling, couldn't adapt to this damp rainforest at all. Whether it was the slippery ground or the snakes and insects everywhere, they made them very nervous. However, as a survival instructor, Clint had no problem with wilderness survival skills, just lacking a bit of familiarity. And Laura, because she had been active in various desolate places all year round, was very experienced and at ease. But because of her rather independent personality, this kind of teamwork might cause her trouble. After being judged by a professional institution, the two's comprehensive scores were Laura 7.9 and Clint 6.9, a full 1-point difference. So, how did the two perform in this challenge? When crossing the jungle, Clint, who was extremely afraid of snakes, shrank back and let Laura lead the way. The two collected useful things as they walked. In just a short distance, they saw all kinds of animals, mostly various insects and spiders, but soon they discovered several jambu air trees, a type of edible fruit rich in nutrients and moisture. Looking at these jambu air fruits all over the ground, it was truly a dream start. But this wasn't the place where they would set up camp, not only because of the program team's instructions but also because the forest was too damp and full of snakes and insects. So the two continued towards the swamp. However, just as they encountered coconut trees and were about to pick some coconuts, Laura accidentally got injured. While chopping the coconut, she accidentally cut her finger deeply. Soon, Laura's hand was covered in blood. When injured in the wild, the most feared situation is wound infection. Someone had already learned this lesson the hard way last time, so Clint hurriedly gave Laura a simple bandage, and then the two continued on their way. Fortunately, not far from where they started, they discovered a babbling mountain stream. Not long after, they successfully reached the sandy beach by the sea. For the next half-month or so, they would set up camp here. Laura used coconut water to disinfect her hands simply. Then, thinking of returning to the mountain stream, she planned what to do next. Clint, however, said that they needed to set up camp as soon as possible now. But when choosing a location, Clint's extreme fear of animals like snakes, insects, and bats made Laura doubt that he was really a survival expert. In the end, Clint took Laura's advice and made a nest in the grass beside the beach. The two were busy until nightfall, before they finally managed to set up a simple shelter. When the next day dawned, the two immediately realized something was wrong. Laura's legs were covered with dense red spots, as if she had some severe skin disease, but in fact, they had just been attacked by sandflies. These tiny biting flies were extremely terrible. Not only could they leave you covered in small bumps, making it impossible to sleep, but they could also easily transmit various viruses. Thus, the two, feeling unbearably itchy all over, immediately decided to start a fire. Clint tried the sawing method to start a fire, but failed quickly. The dampness on the island didn't just refer to the climate. Everything on the island was full of moisture. So Laura, standing beside him, began to think of other ways. Since the sawing method didn't work, they would use the most traditional method of fire making by drilling wood. Then she asked Clint to fetch water from the mountain stream. After all, despite the dampness, the temperature and the sun here were scorching. If they suffered from heat stroke and dehydration, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all their efforts, Laura also failed. When the sun set, they still hadn't managed to start a fire. On the second night, they were attacked even more fiercely by sandhawks. All night long, Clint only slept for 30 minutes, while Laura didn't sleep at all. The prolonged biting made the two suffer terribly. Even Laura's feet had swollen up like small buns, and without a fire to keep them warm at night, their shelter became a lively place. Various small insects attracted mice, which in turn attracted snakes. If they couldn't rest properly at night, it would affect their normal survival activities during the day. It was a vicious cycle. By the third day, the situation had become even worse. The sky grew increasingly gloomy, and soon it began to pour rain. In such weather, forget about starting a fire. Even maintaining body temperature to continue surviving was extremely difficult. In Panama's tropical climate, it was common for rain to last for a week. So in this endless downpour, Clint and Laura endured the daily torture of sandflies, huddling in their small shelter, struggling to survive. Time slowly passed until the 8th day. The rain had lasted for 6 days. In the storm where day and night were indistinguishable, Laura was almost eaten alive by sandflies. This young and beautiful woman was now covered in small red bumps all over her body, which had even spread to her face. Under such prolonged torture, Laura's body had reacted violently. If she had an anaphylactic shock under such circumstances, she would be in life-threatening danger within minutes. So now she must use a fire to drive away the sandflies and warm her body up. Otherwise, she might not make it through the night. So the whole day, the two tried to start a fire. But because it had just finished raining, everything was damp. Clint was full of doubts about using these things to make a fire by drilling wood. But with Laura's persistence, sparkles finally appeared amidst the constant friction. They finally lit a bonfire. With the fire, their primitive life could be said to have reached a new era. Laura also found some noni leaves in the woods, roasted them, and applied them to her feet. These medicinal leaves took effect quickly, and her swollen feet began to return to normal. On the 11th day, although the fire had solved most of their problems, drinking coconut juice and eating tree fruits for a long time clearly couldn't provide the two with enough energy. They needed food now, and hunger was always the easiest thing to make people irritable. Under such circumstances, the relationship between the two gradually became tense. Clint got angry because Laura often placed coconuts in the shelter, as this would attract a large number of ants, and these ants posed a great safety hazard to them. Such discord between companions was quite fatal, and their food reserves were also running low. Most of the jambu air fruits had been picked, and the fruits on the trees had also started to rot. So, they had to start looking for other food. The two turned their attention to the sea. Laura directly made 2 baskets to catch fish, while Clint made spears and a raft. However, the coral reef area around the island was full of sharks. If the two rashly went into the water, the danger would be considerable. Clint, who had chosen swimming goggles as his initial equipment, actually had no experience of going underwater at all. He started to panic just a few minutes after diving down. All of this made Laura extremely angry, so she had to go into the water herself to set up traps. But when she surfaced, Clint had already returned to the beach with the raft, and then confidently walked towards the jungle. I have to say, this guy was really a master of theory, but just that, a master of theory. As soon as he entered the jungle and saw a few snakes, he started to miss Laura again. This man, who could talk better than anyone else, had wandered around all day without doing anything. He was afraid of this and afraid of that. In the end, it was Laura who had splashed around in the water for a long time and brought up a sea urchin. However, when it was roasted and they looked at the peeled sea urchin, Clint couldn't bring himself to eat it. To be honest, I think the decimal point in his comprehensive score could be moved 1 place forward. Now Laura not only had to hunt for food, but also had to take care of this big baby's psychological state so that he wouldn't vent the anger brought by hunger on his companion. Time came to the 13th day. Clint, who hadn't had any protein for 2 weeks, was already quite weak. The irritable him looked at Laura more and more unfavorably. Finally, the two had a quarrel that day, because Clint had disappeared for a few hours, just to chop some firewood, while Laura thought that he should have found food in such a long time. The man felt that he had done a lot and was already very tired, yet Laura was still trying to tell him what to do. After a fierce quarrel, the two parted unhappily. However, since they still had to live together for another week, the two tacitly let the matter pass. On the 17th day, both Laura and Clint were in quite bad shape. Although Laura could eat sea urchins and snails besides coconut tree fruits, the amount was too small. As for Clint, he hadn't had any protein at all. Hunger had started to take a toll on his body, and even his big belly had shrunk a bit. The two now desperately needed a big meal, so Laura thought of the lobster traps she had set up earlier. When she took down the basket and looked inside, a huge wave of joy instantly overwhelmed her. There were actually 2 lobsters in this small basket. This was really the best news ever. Even Clint was extremely excited. They could finally have a proper meal, and having tasted the sweetness, Clint also began to support Laura in continuing to set traps in the sea. After all, the lobsters were so delicious. So next, they still had 3 days left to make a sturdy enough raft to take them to the exit in the open sea. This was not an easy task. The rafts they had made before would almost always fall apart after drifting not far, as they didn't have good fixing materials. The disintegration of the raft was almost inevitable. Moreover, the sea tides were not calm either, so the two looked at the sea surface and thought for a while before deciding to charge straight ahead, because they were likely to encounter fierce creatures under the reefs on both sides. But now they needed to have another big meal to give themselves enough energy to face the final challenge. The two held their spears and ventured into the forest, arriving at the adjacent swamp area, which was the territory of caimans. Not long after entering, Laura spotted a huge caiman. Clint instantly chickened out, and without saying a word, he took off. Before Laura even mentioned that she was going to attack the caiman, Clint was already retreating while saying that he didn't have the strength to fight a crocodile. However, on the night of the 19th day, a huge surprise came knocking. Just as the two had gone to bed, they heard a strange noise. It was the caiman that had actually found its way here. The two cautiously looked around everywhere, and then Clint saw a baby crocodile. What a coincidence. He immediately knocked the little crocodile unconscious with a fork and took it away. The two, acting like thieves, ran all the way back to the campsite with the baby crocodile. and then joyfully started to process. This poor little crocodile. That night, the small lump of crocodile meat satisfied the two immensely. The next day, Clint regained his vigor again. Since it was the second to last day, they were going to leave this sandfly-infested hellhole tomorrow. So all day long, the two were busy making a large raft that could carry both of them. In order to successfully reach the exit, the two put in all their effort, because this bamboo raft was their hope of leaving here. I have to say, the theoretical master Clint was quite insightful. Taking into account the influence of storms and waves, he specified the time and route for going to sea, and after the two hurriedly built the bamboo raft, the time finally came to the 21st day. Laura and Clint pushed their bamboo raft out to sea. The gloomy weather made the two a bit worried, and the increasingly violent waves indicated that a storm was approaching. So they now needed to race against time to reach the location of the exit before the sea surface got out of control. Fortunately, when the two reached the open sea on their small wooden raft, a speedboat also arrived. The two joyfully climbed onto the speedboat, and this nightmare-like 21-day challenge was over. In the end, after this challenge, Clint's comprehensive score rose from 6.9 to 7.3, while Laura's rose from 7.9 to 8.2. The speedboat cut through the sea surface like a scar, and Laura finally escaped the clutches of the sharks. This is the worst island in the world. No one can survive here for more than a week, and this time, a naked man and woman are going to take on the challenge of surviving here for a full 21 days. The speedboat cut through the waves and arrived at the Maldives archipelago in the Indian Ocean, 64 kilometers from the equator. Although many people's impression of this place is that of a holiday resort, in fact, many remote islands here are human no-go zones. The tropical climate brings temperatures as high as 48 or 49 degrees Celsius, along with super strong storms that can last for weeks when they hit. Coupled with the various dangerous creatures in the coral reefs in the offshore area, it's almost a forbidden land for humans. And today, a man named Jonathan and a woman named Allison are going to challenge this place. Jonathan used to be a reconnaissance scout and sniper in the Marine Corps. He loves fitness and has participated in triathlons. He is full of confidence for this challenge. As for Allison, she is a survival expert who loves surfing. This is a girl who has been traveling around the world since she was young and has almost visited all countries. This challenge is also a quite novel survival adventure for her, and the speedboat, carrying the two who were both apprehensive and expectant, has slowly approached the destination. However, looking at the blazing sun in the sky, Jonathan suddenly started to have a bad feeling. The humidity here was high, and with the direct sunlight, humans could easily get sunburned in this situation, and what Jonathan least wanted was for his private parts to get sunburned. On the other side, the surfing girl could accept this kind of environment. It was just a bit hot, that's all. The speedboat had stopped. The two took off their clothes, jumped onto this shallow beach, and walked towards the island. The two met on the beach. After polite greetings and self-introductions, they went to the grass by the shore and found their initial gear. Jonathan had brought a military hand axe, a rather practical item, while Allison had brought flint. By the third episode, finally someone had brought fire-starting tools. It wasn't easy. After confirming their initial gear and portable cameras, they saw a map. It not only roughly showed the surrounding environment, but also marked the final exit for them. The two were currently on a small triangular island, and 1.6 kilometers across from it was a larger, narrow island. The final exit was located at the shallow beach of the narrow island. After studying it, whether considering the supplies or the location of the exit, they should now go to the other island first, to set up camp. However, the turbulent ocean current, that was 1.6 kilometers long between the two islands, made Allison a bit troubled. Moreover, there were many sharks in this place, but there was no other way. Staying on this small island would even make survival a difficult problem for them. So on the first day of the challenge, the two adjusted their states and plunged into the sea. Although they said it was difficult, in fact, 1.6 kilometers wasn't much of a challenge for them. They were just afraid of consuming too much physical strength at the beginning. After a long time in the water, the two successfully arrived at the larger, narrow island. Of course, before the challenge began, the professional institution still scored the two based on experience, skills, and psychology. Jonathan got 6.9 points, while Allison got 8 points. No wonder this girl, who had been running around the world since she was young, got an 8 at the start. It was simply incredibly strong. However, compared to Allison, who was good at adapting to various environments, Jonathan's situation wasn't so good. Before the first day was half over, he, who had just landed on the large island, was already red and purple all over. This was a sign of severe sunburn. under such high temperatures and direct sunlight, the consequences of being severely sunburned at the beginning. The consequences were extremely terrible. Jonathan also noticed the condition of his body, and urgently looked for a place to shelter from the sunlight. Then, in the shade of a coconut grove, Jonathan began to build their shelter. Allison, on the other hand, started using various plants to weave hats and utensils. However, it wasn't long before the after effects of Jonathan's severe sunburn kicked in. This degree of sunburn was extremely torturous. Almost no one could endure that kind of pain. This man, who was red and purple all over, was almost unable to move. The gradually spreading intense pain all over his body forced him to lie down on the spot. Jonathan now realized that he had completely underestimated the tropical sun, even to the point that in this situation of being severely sunburned all over, he had started to consider withdrawing. This left Allison at a loss. Now she was not only responsible for all the work of building the campsite, but also constantly using the surrounding plants to weave useful things without a break. But if her teammate withdrew, then she would have to live alone on this island for 21 days. Surviving alone in such a desperate place, without the companionship of a teammate, one's mind could easily collapse. So Allison, who had been busy for 2 days, was almost at her breaking point. On the second night, this girl, wiping away tears, told her grievances to the portable camera. Although Jonathan had done almost nothing these 2 days, she didn't mind that. What she feared most was that Jonathan couldn't bear it, and withdrew directly. In that case, just thinking about being the only one left on this island from then on, Allison was almost on the verge of collapse. Time came to the third day. Jonathan's sunburn was still severe, but Allison didn't give up. She found a kind of white berry, crushed it into juice, and applied it to Jonathan's body. This was a method for treating sunburn that she had learned from tropical people. However, even if Jonathan didn't withdraw at the moment, the intense pain all over his body also prevented him from doing anything. Everything fell on Allison's shoulders. It had been 3 days. It was difficult to find fresh water on this island, so she now needed to go find some coconuts to rehydrate the two of them. Moreover, during her circumnavigation of the island, Allison saw garbage washed up by the waves. For her, who was stark naked, rummaging through this ocean current-borne garbage might well lead to a pleasant surprise. Soon, Allison found a skirt full of tribal charm. After happily putting it on, she continued to search for coconuts. However, after Allison, having gone through great hardships, returned with the coconuts, she was questioned by Jonathan. Finding only this little amount of coconuts in such a long time, in his view, what they needed most now was fresh water. So, while unceremoniously drinking the coconut juice, he blamed Allison for being totally unreliable. This made Allison extremely aggrieved. Since Jonathan had collapsed from severe sunburn, Allison had been shouldering everything, building their shelter, gathering all kinds of useful things, running around to find coconuts. She hadn't stopped for a moment. In the end, her teammate had such an attitude, which almost completely shattered Allison's mindset. However, Allison was mentally strong, and didn't take much of a hit. Time slowly came to the 5th day. Jonathan was still lying down every day, watching the busy Allison, and couldn't help but wonder if the production team had done it on purpose. Seeing that there was an 8-point tough person in this team, they directly arranged a teammate who couldn't move. By the 6th day, they were facing an unprecedented crisis, and Allison, who had taken on everything, also collapsed. Severe dysmenorrhea made her unable to move anymore. This time, Jonathan, who had been lying down for 5 days, had to get up. Although his body was still in pain, at least he could move around now. So Jonathan directly grabbed his military axe and rushed into the forest. He was going to dig for fresh water. They couldn't keep drinking coconut juice. After relying on coconuts to replenish water for several days, their bodies could no longer bear it. Arriving in the forest, Jonathan chose a spot and started digging right away. Finding fresh water was a matter of great urgency for them, but after a whole day of busy work, he had no success. On the 7th day, Allison was still being tortured by dysmenorrhea, and the only one who could move was Jonathan. However, even though he had dug a deep pit big enough to hold a person, he still hadn't seen any sign of fresh water, but they now had no way out. If they couldn't dig up fresh water, they would really be in a desperate situation. But just in the evening of the 7th day, water finally seeped out from the deep pit Jonathan had dug. It wasn't seawater, but life-saving fresh water. After they filled the plastic bottles they had scavenged with the water, Allison started to worry. Could this kind of water really be drunk? The water in the bottles was pure white, like a bottle of milk. However, Jonathan couldn't care less. He was about to be dehydrated. He directly grabbed the bottle and started drinking, but Allison still cautiously believed that one shouldn't drink strange water from the wild randomly. On the 9th day, Allison, having recovered a bit, even found Jonathan a pair of underwear. But an embarrassing thing also happened that day. Jonathan had diarrhea, and Allison stepped on his excrement. This left Allison quite speechless. Anyone with a bit of wilderness survival experience knew that one shouldn't excrete near the campsite, and he hadn't even buried it. Although Jonathan readily admitted his mistake, this also made Allison doubt his reliability. The two were increasingly not acting like a team. Disagreements even led them to quarrel, and Jonathan also made it clear that he wasn't actually a survival expert. He had just received survival training in the military. In terms of the philosophy of surviving in the wild, the two could hardly communicate. Time came to the 13th day. The two, whose relationship had hit rock bottom, had to scurry around for protein. Relying on coconuts and edible plants, they had managed to hold on for nearly 2 weeks. But now, if they didn't find a way to ingest protein, they absolutely wouldn't be able to make it to the last day. However, this place wasn't just a no-go zone for humans. Even the marine life around it was pitifully scarce. But fortunately, Allison saw a lost eel in the shallow waters. Although this highly aggressive creature was dangerous, given the current situation, she had no time to be afraid. So, Allison stepped into the shallow waters filled with sharp corals, chasing after the poor lost eel. She even took a tumble accidentally. Finally, after a frenzy of wild slashing by Allison, the eel surfaced. The two finally had their first meat meal in 2 weeks. Watching Allison cleaning the eel by the seaside, Jonathan also began to reflect on himself. Although he was a soldier, when it came to wilderness survival, Allison was, after all, a tough person with a comprehensive score of 8. So, in fact, he should listen more to Allison's opinions. After 2 days of time came to the 17th day. To prove himself, Jonathan rushed into the shallow coral reefs and successfully found a huge clam. This made both of them extremely happy. A harmonious small team gave them great motivation. But by the 19th day, the gloomy weather made them nervous. The dull sea breeze, the undulating waves, all of this indicated that a storm was approaching. In the face of such a natural force, the two of them were tiny and fragile. By the afternoon, the storm was visibly approaching. The two could only huddle in their shelter. Now, they were hungry and cold, but there were only 2 days left until the end. They had to find a way to hold on. With little physical strength left, they could only snuggle up in the shelter to keep each other warm. After all, Allison had just finished her menstrual period, and her already not-so-strong constitution had given out. They could only stay in the small shed, waiting for the storm to pass. And by night, accompanied by wild raindrops, the Maldives welcomed the worst storm it had seen in several years. The howling hurricane even reached speeds of 112 kilometers per hour. At dawn on the 20th day, the two huddled in their small shelter, not daring to move. What Allison was most worried about now was whether their small shed would be blown away. The storm raged for a whole day and 2 nights. When the 21st day came, the sun rose. On the small, messy island, the small shed still stood. They had made it through. This storm had brought many plastic bottles. The two used these plastic bottles to make a buoy, and successfully reached the exit by the island. When the two boarded the sailboat that had come to pick them up, their hunger summer camp officially came to an end. However, over these 21 days, based on their various performances, Jonathan's comprehensive score rose from 6.9 to 7.2, while Allison's rose from 8 to 8.4. After ending their nightmare experience on this tropical island, they returned to their own lives. Only that lonely little island remembered that there had once been 2 naked people who had suffered greatly on it. This is Kalimantan, located in the Malay archipelago. It is known as the world's 3rd largest island. This is a dangerous island. The terrain is rugged and perilous, covered with vast expanses of pristine jungle. Due to the tropical climate and an annual rainfall exceeding 4,000 millimeters, flash floods frequently occur here. Not only that, as one of the world's oldest primary forests, the creatures here are also exceptionally dangerous. Poisonous snakes and insects abound. And the challenge target for this episode of Primitive Living is precisely this wild and untamed jungle. The man is named Puma, an outdoor activities expert. Because he was once nearly trapped to death in the wild, he later devoted himself to studying the field of wilderness survival. His overall rating reaches 7.1. The woman is named Julie, a towering figure at 1.93 meters tall. She is a professional teacher in wilderness survival, capable of identifying animal species based on footprints. However, her overall rating is astonishingly low, only 5.5. This has set a new low. After having their clothes confiscated by the jeep, the two headed towards the gathering point. Walking along the path, Puma and Julie saw their teammates. They exchanged greetings and the atmosphere between the two, meeting for the first time, was quite harmonious. After introductions, the two picked up the nearby bags and began to confirm their props. Julie brought a pot, while Puma brought a knife. Although a fire starter paired with a knife is the optimal combination, in the wilderness, the role of a pot cannot be overlooked. Therefore, if the two can successfully start a fire, with the help of this pot, they should be relatively more comfortable. Then they checked the map. The exit is located downstream of the river, while they are in the jungle on one side of the river. So they now need to cross the jungle first, and set up camp by the riverside. While ensuring their survival, they should look for the right moment to head to the exit. So after the challenge began, the two hurriedly walked towards the river. On the first day, they needed to reach the riverside and build a campsite, as the risk of spending the night in the jungle was too great. However, walking barefoot in the rainforest was indeed no easy feat. The two advanced slowly, one step deep, one step shallow. At this point, they finally realized what it meant for the terrain to be rugged and perilous. The slopes in the jungle were quite steep, and the ground was slippery. One could easily slide down from the steep slopes. The two were fully alert, and with Puma's help, although Julie was flustered by the rugged rainforest, nothing went wrong. Not long after they walked, Julie spotted wild boar footprints, which made them a bit worried. If wild boars were active near the campsite, it would not be a pleasant situation. Although Julie was tall and sturdy, her physical condition seemed not to be high. After only half a day of walking, she already felt dehydrated. This also worried Puma, because although he was a bit tired from the journey, he did not feel thirsty at all. But soon, they saw a large tree serving as a marker. After checking the map, they confirmed that the river was just ahead. The two rallied their spirits and continued forward, soon hearing the sound of flowing water. Around 4 p.m., they finally reached the river. Looking at the sky, they first decided to build a shelter. To stay away from poisonous snakes and scorpions, as well as large animals like wild boars, they chose a treehouse high off the ground. Between several sturdy trees, they erected a high frame. However, it was already quite late, and after a flurry of activity, they could only create a rudimentary structure, but at least they had a place to rest. However, at night, they actually encountered wild boars. Although it caused a commotion, the two, hiding on the high frame, did not have any encounters with the wild boars, but this incident scared them badly, and until the next day, they were still shaken. But with a new day beginning, the two also needed to prepare their next plan. First was to start a fire. They hadn't had time to do it yesterday, so they had to quickly build a fire, not only considering the fire's effect in repelling beasts, but they also had brought a pot, and they naturally did not dare to drink raw water. So as long as they had fire, they would have an endless supply of fresh water resources, and they would not have to worry about drinking water during this challenge. The second priority was to reinforce the campsite. After all, last night, their shelter was almost just a framework. Puma was in charge of daily living matters here. In the primitive rainforest, starting a fire by drilling wood was extremely difficult. Just finding sufficiently dry materials was a challenge. So, Puma struggled for most of the day without success. This frustrated him greatly. The loss of physical strength made him feel terrible. He even had the idea of drinking raw water directly. So Julie took on the task of starting a fire, and Puma went aside to rest. But the thought of drinking raw water lingered in his mind like a nightmare. Considering that they might need to live for a while longer, he found a secluded tributary and took a couple of sips. The mountain spring water tasted so good. Julie, on the other hand, worked diligently at the campsite all afternoon. The next day, their fire-starting plan failed. Time came to the third day. Julie was almost at her breaking point. She had always had a low physical constitution, and the prolonged lack of water intake made her look quite unwell. So Puma started thinking of other ways. Since Julie was unwilling to drink raw water no matter what, he planned to look for some underground tributaries. This groundwater, formed by soil filtration, was basically drinkable. Searching along the riverbank, Puma actually found some underground tributaries. Although there wasn't much water, it was like a lifesaver for Julie. After taking in some water, she felt like she had come back to life. Time slowly approached the fourth day. The two were still struggling with starting a fire, but today the sun was shining brightly, and the air was much drier. After a morning of effort, they finally got a few sparks. Then human civilization finally took a qualitative leap forward. They successfully lit a fire. This made the two quite emotional. This fire was the key to their survival. Life was hard, but ensuring the fire kept burning in the rainforest was even harder. Although they now had water to drink and their relationship was getting better, they still couldn't let their guard down. Time passed slowly as the two got along harmoniously. By the sixth day, they needed to figure out how to get some food. Julie made a net for catching fish, but could only catch some small crabs. Puma, on the other hand, even ate worms directly. Although it looked a bit miserable, it was like what Bear Grylls said, "This thing has 6 times the protein of beef." Now their lives were somewhat on track, steady with a touch of leisure, and even occasionally with small surprises. For example, today Julie actually found a turtle in her net. Wow, this was a feast. Julie was so happy that she almost jumped on the spot. After a flurry of activity, Julie successfully replenished her energy. Then she started to continue repairing their little treehouse. But it seemed that Julie had eaten the whole turtle by herself. Of course, whether she shared it with Puma or not, no one knew. But when this man came back, he discovered a piece of bad news. Their fire had gone out. There wasn't even a single spark in the pile of ashes. It seemed to have been out for quite a while. This sudden turn of events left both of them stunned. Julie even felt a bit resentful towards Puma because while she was busy, he was by the fire. But fire can be lit again. Teammates shouldn't fall out over this. Although that's what they thought, they couldn't help but be affected by the changing weather. Just as the fire went out, the sky darkened. Soon, it poured with rain, leaving Puma and Julie dumbfounded. This was the ultimate case of adding insult to injury. Starting a fire in the rainforest was already difficult, and with the rain washing everything away, it was almost impossible to start a fire now. Moreover, being soaked by the rain, their body temperatures kept dropping. Not only did they have no way to look for food, but they also had to constantly worry about hypothermia. This was probably what was meant by being cold and hungry, but the dangers didn't stop there. Because of the rain, the small stream they relied on for survival also rose significantly in water level, directly triggering a mountain flood. Their campsite was not far from the riverbank, and the violent mountain flood could threaten their lives at any moment. And it wasn't just that. The giant trees in the jungle also started to teeter precariously. By nightfall, amidst the thunderous and lightning-filled torrential rain, their body temperatures had dropped alarmingly low. They were now completely unable to ensure their own safety. Moreover, the thing they feared most had happened. Trees began to topple over. The most dangerous incident occurred when a fallen tree was only 3 or 4 meters away from them. If it had fallen a bit more and hit them, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Mountain floods, landslides, and countless falling trees surrounded them with danger. Throughout the entire night, Puma and Julie spent it in fear and trembling. By the 8th day, the torrential rain had ended. Although their shelter was destroyed by a falling tree at night, fortunately, neither of them was injured. This disaster left them disheartened. Under such an outburst from nature, no amount of survival experience could make a difference. However, since the weather had cleared up, they had to pull themselves together and continue to work hard. First, they needed to rebuild a shelter. But Puma's condition was not right. During the day, he felt weak all over. By night, this man collapsed. He felt cold all over, shivering constantly, and his body temperature kept rising. By the 9th day, Puma had completely collapsed. Julie was extremely worried. Her partner was burning up with fever, and even when lying down, Puma was constantly groaning. The production team, sensing that something was wrong, finally sent medical assistance to Puma. The medic measured Puma's temperature in the shed. Things had finally gotten out of control. Under these conditions, it was basically impossible to determine what exactly was causing Puma's high fever. It could be bacteria, or it could be cholera, typhoid fever, dengue fever, or even malaria. So, he had to withdraw from the challenge now. If any of these diseases were not treated promptly, the consequences would be very serious. Julie beside him burst into tears on the spot. She was worried not only for her partner who had worked together with her to survive for more than a week, but also desperate for the days ahead. She wasn't injured, so she wouldn't choose to withdraw. But in reality, surviving in the wild alone posed a tremendous psychological test. Although there would be cameramen from the production team during the day, at night, she would be alone sleeping in this dark, wild, primitive forest. Just thinking about it made her feel like she was about to collapse. Moreover, when Puma was taken away, his body temperature had risen to 40 degrees Celsius. After being sent to the hospital for treatment, it was finally discovered that Puma's illness was caused by that sip of sweet mountain spring water. That one sip had infected him with a rather terrifying bacterium, so not drinking raw water in the wild was truly a life-saving rule. Now, only Julie was left alone at the campsite. Although she reluctantly chose to continue the challenge, as the sun gradually disappeared and she was about to spend the night alone in this forest, the panic seeped into her bones. Fortunately, after Puma left, she lit a fire right away. Although she didn't have to worry about water anymore, she now had to do all the work alone and search for food everywhere. She wasn't getting enough nourishment to begin with, and this constant busyness left her mentally and physically exhausted. As time passed in this hardship, Julie was on the verge of collapse. She could hardly find anything to eat. This rainforest had dealt her a heavy blow. Her teammate had been knocked down, and she couldn't find suitable food either. She could only barely survive day by day. Being alone, she couldn't take care of everything. So when Julie came back after being busy outside, she found that the fire had gone out again. Without fire, water, or food, Julie was overwhelmed by negative emotions. She felt she couldn't hold on anymore. All sorts of wild thoughts and panic made her restless. The difficulty of this challenge far exceeded her expectations. Finally, Julie's body and mind reached their limits. On the 18th day, she limped back along the path she had come. Due to the depression and anxiety from losing her teammate, Julie also announced her withdrawal from their primitive life. The 21-day challenge failed. They were the first pair to fail the challenge in the first season, falling in the tropical rainforest. It had to be said that the rainforest was indeed an extremely difficult map, not to mention when a teammate recklessly drank raw water. To persist alone, one first had to be mentally strong enough, and Julie had failed due to anxiety. As for Puma, after receiving emergency treatment, he was out of danger. However, the failure of the challenge also lowered their ratings accordingly. Puma's rating dropped from 7.4 to 6.1, and Julie's dropped from 5.5 to 5. The two left this place in a disheveled manner and returned to their own lives. Located in the southern part of the United States, Louisiana boasts more than half of the wetlands in this region. Here, there are over 1 million alligators, 6 kinds of ferocious and deadly venomous snakes that strike fear into people's hearts, as well as countless terrifying venomous insects. Coupled with prolonged storms and heavy rain, vast tracts of dry land have been swallowed up by storm surges. Unbearable dampness and omnipresent dangers define this episode's primitive survival challenge location. The male challenger is named Billy, an avid outdoor survival enthusiast, who is skilled at crafting and wielding primitive weapons, with a comprehensive rating of 8.1, a real super hunk. The other female challenger is Kai, a stunt performer, who is also quite obsessed with wilderness survival activities, with a rating of 6.3. The two were taken by boat to a swamp. After undressing, they soon realized something was amiss. The temperature here might have a huge impact on them, but since they had come, they slowly made their way to the gathering spot. After some greetings and introductions, they found their backpacks containing their initial gear. Kai brought a lighter, while Billy brought a knife. The best combination, no need to elaborate. Then they looked at the map. Starting from their gathering point, they needed to identify directions, traverse through the jungle and swamp, and reach a high ground in the distance to set up camp. Then they had to survive, and find the right time to reach the exit located in the deep water area. However, this deep water area was the territory of alligators. Their task was practically hellish in difficulty, but they had no time to dawdle. After identifying the direction, they set off without delay. They hadn't walked far, when the bone-chilling swamp water made them suffer. Moreover, Billy's biggest concern wasn't this. When temperature-regulating humans enter the swamp, they are like 2 giant pink meatballs. All predators here would see them as easy prey. With countless alligators and venomous snakes, it was fraught with danger. Sure enough, they hadn't walked far when they saw an alligator calling for its mate. They could only tiptoe away slowly. As they walked, a new problem arose. It was easy to get lost in such a place. Even though Billy was quite reliable, after walking for a while, he realized they had been going in circles. But fortunately, relying on the sun overhead, Billy and Kai successfully reached the designated high ground. However, compared to other places, resources here were extremely scarce. While building their shelter, they pondered what resources they could utilize here. But to their surprise, when Kai went to look for fan palms, she actually found a pot. Wow, what luck! It was equivalent to 3 initial knives. And it wasn't just Kai who was incredibly lucky. Billy, after all, was an 8.1 rated hunk. When he saw a snake, he said he was scared, but his body was honest as he charged forward and caught it with his bare hands. Although he was bitten, he was quite certain it wasn't a venomous snake. But Kai was terrified. Nevertheless, they got their first meal. No wonder he was an 8-point expert. His strength was truly terrifying. Then the two successfully built a fire and cooked the snake, enjoying a delicious meal on the first day. Then at night, low temperatures and mosquitoes began to wreak havoc, torturing them miserably. The next morning, the two decided to build a better shelter first. Not only was the low temperature a problem, if they continued to be tortured by mosquitoes like last night, they would eventually collapse without enough rest. So after some discussion, they started looking for various plants to make a bed and block the wind. But soon, Kai, who was searching for materials, ran into trouble. A highly venomous and fierce snake appeared beneath her feet. She immediately started calling for help. Upon hearing that his companion was in trouble, Billy immediately improvised, whittling a spear and then, angrily, went to deal with the snake. Of course, the main reason was that the snake was edible. Looking at the wood thrust in its face, the snake opened its mouth wide in a threat display, only to be instantly struck on the head by Billy's swift and accurate blow. This fierce snake met its end right there. Kai beside him turned into a little fangirl, completely mesmerized by this expert's snake-killing technique. But snakes are the last thing this place lacks. Not long after, Kai saw another one. Then Billy started running over excitedly to continue catching snakes. But as he caught more and more, Billy began to feel a sense of fear. How could there be so many snakes here? Almost every few steps, one could see a snake by the swamp, or in the bushes. Billy was going berserk with killing snakes, chasing them directly into the swamp with red eyes. But in fact, he couldn't kill all the snakes here. Even with his overwhelming ferocity, he might scare away the snakes on this side, but new ones would soon appear on the other side. To prevent these snakes from sneaking into their campsite, Billy tirelessly ran around catching snakes everywhere, not only for safety, but also for food. He even directly grabbed them with his hands. Once he confirmed they were non-venomous, not sparing even those lazily basking in the sun. Kai beside him was stunned. She realized she had encountered a real expert. The second day ended with the two happily catching snakes everywhere. Time came to the fourth day. Although it was still sunny, the clouds were moving quite fast. It seemed that the weather was about to change, but the two still continued to repair their shelter step by step. Although the progress was slow due to the abundance of snakes, Billy still steadily continued to search for materials, even regretting that he hadn't caught the moccasin snake he had just encountered. But in fact, Billy's emotions were also fluctuating. After all, this place was extremely dangerous. No one could remain absolutely calm in an environment surrounded by crises. At dawn on the fifth day, the worst situation occurred. A sudden heavy rainstorm accompanied by strong winds hit their campsite. The plummeting temperature not only affected their bodies, but under the torrential rain, the fire also almost went out. By 5 or 6 in the morning, the two had fallen into absolute crisis. Since the hand-built grass shed was basically not waterproof, their campsite was now flooded, and the fire had completely gone out. Their body temperatures kept dropping, and under the soaking rain, their hands and feet had begun to slowly stiffen. Fortunately, they managed to endure this nightmare-like night by gritting their teeth. After daybreak in the morning, the rain had stopped, but the rare high ground in this swamp was completely submerged, with water accumulating on the ground reaching a depth of 20 to 30 centimeters. This made Billy very frustrated. They had lost everything, or even worse, so now they needed to start from scratch, finding a suitable place to set up camp again, and then lighting a fire. However, in a place surrounded by shoals everywhere, it was difficult even to build a platform above the water surface. Moreover, having just been soaked in the rain, starting a fire was also a problem. Fortunately, Kai had an expert by her side. Using thick logs as the base, they built a platform above the water surface. Then Billy used the shavings scraped off to successfully light a fire. Under the circumstances where everything had been washed away, they actually managed to turn the situation around. One had to say, he truly deserved to be an expert with an 8-point rating. But after soaking in the stagnant swamp water for so long, even Billy couldn't hold on anymore. His feet were having problems. The prolonged soaking made his feet extremely painful, and the softened skin was easily invaded by foreign objects, and then infected. This made Billy very worried. They could no longer continue to move around in the stagnant water, so the two stayed at the campsite and began to think about their next move. Although the snakes were almost impossible to find after the heavy rain, Billy noticed that there were still quite a few crayfish in this swamp, but he hadn't caught any yet. The prolonged lack of food made this snake-killing expert a bit listless. He watched as birds around him casually picked up crayfish, as if shopping in a supermarket, and he couldn't help but feel envious. So the two tough guys came up with an idea. They used their feet as bait to attract aquatic organisms, and then used these aquatic organisms as bait to fish for crayfish. One had to say, these two were really tough on themselves. However, on the 8th day, the bait they had obtained with their bodies didn't work. The crayfish traps were empty. Billy, who was starving, couldn't hold on anymore. His mental state worried Kai greatly. Time came to the 10th day. Hungry and enduring foot pain, searched for firewood everywhere. Due to the prolonged lack of energy intake, their conditions were not optimistic, but as long as they could still move, they wouldn't give up. On the 13th day, Billy couldn't take it anymore. After observing the direction of the water flow, he judged that there should be a higher place upstream. But Kai didn't agree, because Billy hadn't left the campsite platform for 4 days. She doubted whether Billy had enough physical strength to search for a new campsite. The two had a difference of opinion, but as Billy had said, the result of them staying here now would be a failed challenge. Moreover, the The two were a team. So after some negotiation, they decided to set off the next day to search for a new campsite. Soon, the 14th day arrived. The two slowly walked in another direction. This migration could be described as desperate. They were now nearly exhausted, and they also had to be on guard against the dangerous creatures lurking around. They encountered quite a few snakes along the way, and after walking for most of the day, no sign of land appeared. This made Billy quite frustrated. He felt he had made a wrong choice, but the next second, Kai let out a surprised cry. Because she saw land, they had succeeded. Green grass, trees, and soil came into view, and Billy finally breathed a sigh of relief. This was a rather perfect place, with a dry environment, and palm trees all around, an extremely suitable place for camping. The two lit a fire, and after resting for a night, on the 15th day, they started building a shelter again. But the two, who hadn't eaten, were almost at their wits' end. They urgently needed to replenish their energy. Time came to the 17th day. Due to hunger, Billy, the main damage dealer in the team, was almost done for. However, Kai turned out to be a very qualified healer, constantly encouraging her companion. With Kai's blessing of courage, the two mustered all their strength to craft weapons, and then began to search for prey everywhere. Over this period of time, Kai had always relied on her keen observation to provide help to Billy, and this time was no exception. She found footprints that could be called dinner. After Billy explored a bit, he set his sights on a tree hole, and then went in head-on. He soon caught this poor small rodent. This meal of meat replenished their energy, and helped them get through the immediate crisis, and life here gradually got better. On the 20th day, they began to plan their journey to the exit. This was the last challenge they had to face, because they would be approaching the alligators' territory, so they had to be on guard not only against snakes. The final day finally arrived. The two began to move towards the exit. However, after changing their campsite once, they were actually unsure of the exit's location now. That deep water area full of alligators required them to be extremely vigilant. When the two slowly approached the edge of the deep water area, they began to encounter alligators. These hunters usually hunted in deep water and moved quickly. In this waist-deep water area, if they were targeted, it would almost be a desperate situation. So in order not to alarm these bullies, they could only move slowly and stealthily. But fortunately, the production team didn't make things difficult for them. The two waited for a while at the edge of the deep water area, and then a helicopter arrived. Under the intense commotion, the alligators were also scared away. The two took this opportunity and happily climbed onto the helicopter. This also indicated that their challenge was a success. With only one initial item and nothing else, the two worked together to conquer this terrifying swamp. This was also the most harmonious and complementary team in several episodes. Billy, as the main damage dealer, was truly a big shot. If it weren't for the heavy rain, they could have easily survived just by catching snakes. And Kai, as the keen observer in the team, not only had a pair of sharp eyes, but also took care of Billy's psychology, like a caring older sister. It could be said that in the most difficult swamp map, the two successfully survived for 21 days and completed the challenge. Billy's overall rating also increased from 8.1 to 8.9, while Kai's increased from 6.3 to 7.7.
Be careful. Holy
He's huge. That's a boa.
atta girl!
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, baby!
Look at
Yes!
that guy.
Holy yeah!
Oh my God, I'm so freaking excited right now.
Peru, located in South America, has a nightmarish rainforest that strikes fear into people's hearts. This is the place with the greatest biodiversity on Earth. In the world's largest river that runs through this rainforest, there are over 60 species of piranhas, caimans that can grow up to 6 meters in length, and electric eels capable of releasing currents of up to 500 volts. And that's just in the water. In the boundless and wild rainforest, endless mosquitoes, snakes, insects, and rodents send shivers down people's spines. There are also deadly anacondas and jaguars roaming around. Not only the living creatures, but the weather here is also extremely perilous. During the rainy season, the water levels of the rivers in this rainforest can rise by more than 9 meters. The surging floodwaters can inundate an area equivalent to a state. This place is truly a no-go zone for humans. This is the Amazon, and this episode's challenge has been set in such a place. Over the past few episodes, the rainforest map has generally been acknowledged as the most difficult one, let alone the notorious Amazon. Before the start of this event, one challenger was scared away, so the production team had to spend time looking for the next challenger. 5 days later, the two challengers brought to the Amazon by boat were AK and Tyler, who joined later as a replacement. AK is a full-time housewife but since she has loved primitive experiences since she was a child, she has mastered quite a number of wilderness survival skills. Her overall rating is a fairly average 6.7. As for Tyler, he is a war veteran. More than a decade of military life has equipped him with countless survival skills, so he is full of confidence about conquering the Amazon. However, his overall rating is only 7. The boat sent the two deep into the Amazon. The two of them set off confidently after undressing. Soon, the two naked individuals met at the rendezvous point. After exchanging greetings, they began to confirm their initial items. Tyler had a knife, and AK had a fire starter. A perfect combination. Then the two started studying the map. The task given by the production team was that they had to start from this rendezvous point, traverse about 3 kilometers of jungle, and reach a highland. There was a depression there, inhabited by fish and electric eels, and the surrounding materials were also quite abundant, making it very suitable for camping. As for the exit, it was located in a lake slope on an Amazon tributary, 19 kilometers away. So not only did they have to ensure their survival during these 21 days, but they also had to travel 19 kilometers to reach the exit. Not only was the map difficulty at its maximum, but the task difficulty was also at its peak. For two young people with ratings around 7, conquering the Amazon seemed like a far-fetched idea, but the challenge had already begun. The two identified the direction and headed towards the depression. The difficulty of the Rainforest map can be said to be the highest among all. Perhaps only the swamp map can rival it. As the saying goes, they never knew what deadly things were hidden in the fallen leaves and deadwood underfoot. So the two proceeded cautiously, at a rather slow pace. Although the production team had scouted the area in advance to ensure that no top predators like jaguars were active nearby, apart from jaguars, the jungle still contained many extremely deadly things, such as pythons, electric eels, and piranhas. Moreover, in a forest like the Amazon, the swarms of mosquitoes were the things most likely to make people mentally collapse. Tyler and AK had been walking for a whole morning, but unfortunately, it seemed they were lost. Tyler had passed by this fallen tree 3 times already. It wasn't until after 4 p.m. that they approached the depression and found a suitable spot. Time was getting late, and they planned to divide the work. Tyler would build a shelter first, while AK would try to start a fire using bird nests and other materials. However, things didn't go so smoothly. They hadn't been busy for long when it started to rain from the sky. Although they could still build a canopy in the rain, starting a fire was out of the question. Night had fallen, and on this night without a fire, they began to realize the terror of the Amazon. Countless mosquitoes surrounded them, and driving them away was completely useless. Both of them were bitten miserably, and these frenzied mosquitoes seemed to want to devour them alive. By the next day, the two, who hadn't slept all night, had already started to look haggard. Unlike their initial confidence, Tyler now even felt that this place was more terrifying than a battlefield. He had never encountered such torture before, and the second day was still filled with rain. They still hadn't succeeded in starting a fire. Without a fire, they would still be constantly attacked by mosquitoes that night. The sun rose again, and time came to the third day. The rain finally stopped. They couldn't wait to start a fire. This 48-hour torture was like a warning from the Amazon, shattering their confidence to pieces. Even AK had completely collapsed. Tyler noticed that his teammate's mood was becoming increasingly low, but he had no way to help, only able to comfort her while continuing to try to light the fire. Fortunately, with the clear weather, Tyler successfully lit a fire, which cheered both of them up. But in reality, that night, they were still bitten awake by mosquitoes, because after they fell asleep, the fire burned out in the middle of the night, and by the time they noticed, it was completely dark. They were unable to start a fire again. Even the irritable Tyler even broke the fire starter. So that night, they not only didn't get a good rest but also lost their fire starter. By the 4th day, the two had visibly become haggard. AK's mental state was in great trouble. Just the mosquitoes had tortured them to the point of collapse. So unfortunately, AK dropped out like this. These 4 days had been like a nightmare for her. Her longing for her family also made it impossible for her to persist any longer. After confirmation by the production team, AK dropped out of the challenge. Only Tyler, this man, didn't give up. He still wanted to hold on a bit longer. But in reality, his mind was also on the verge of collapse, not only because of the torture over the past 4 days, but also the impact of his teammates' withdrawal. In a team of only 2 people, unless one was truly exceptionally determined, it was impossible to persist to the end after a teammate dropped out. The one-person Amazon challenge only lasted 1 day. After Tyler had tried his best alone for a day, he also announced his withdrawal. Neither of the 2 challengers in this group had persisted for a week. Adding in the one who dropped out at the beginning, the Amazon jungle had already claimed 3 challengers. Over these few days, AK's overall rating had dropped to 4.3 points, while Tyler's had dropped to 4.4 points. But the challenge wasn't over. The production team wouldn't just swallow this loss quietly, so they directly brought in EJ, a big shot from the first episode, and Laura, the MVP from the second episode, to come to the rescue. Having experienced a challenge before, both of these two now had an overall rating of 8.2. It had to be said, this time, the Amazon might feel the pressure. Both were veterans. They calmly undressed and came to the rendezvous point. For teammates who had already participated in this challenge, both of them had a strong sense of affinity, and the atmosphere was quite harmonious. As for the initial items, they continued to use the fire starter and knife from the previous group. After confirming the task, the two began a new round of challenges. EJ and Laura were both very reliable wilderness survival experts. With good teammates, they were also full of energy. They soon found a highland and began to set up camp. The two had a clear division of labor. EJ looked for materials to prepare for building a shelter, while Laura was responsible for starting the fire. Similar divisions of labor, but the higher-rated ones really did a better job. The two soon lit a fire. It was still early in the day, and the two even had time to continue repairing the shelter. Although the start was quite smooth, at night, mosquitoes didn't care if you were an 8-point or a 0.8-point person. They would still bite you. However, the spirits of EJ and Laura were indeed much tougher. Time moved forward to the 6th day. After several nights of torment, the two had initially adapted to these frenzied mosquitoes, but unfortunately, they hadn't found suitable food in these past few days. Having gone nearly a week without replenishing energy, EJ and Laura were starving, so they found thorns and grubs and began fishing. The fish were biting frequently enough, but the hooks made from thorns were far too easy to shake loose. With one splash, the fish they had worked so hard to hook fell back into the water. This frustrated them considerably. For several days in a row, their fishing plan made little progress. Time moved forward to the 10th day. They were already starving, so they began thinking of other ways to find food, even setting their sights on an Amazon tree boa. But because their weapons weren't sharp enough, coupled with their poor condition, after a period of maneuvering, this huge python still managed to escape the challenge. 2 weeks had already passed. By the 14th day, the two were nearing their limit. They absolutely had to replenish protein and energy now. However, surprises always come suddenly. Today, EJ and Laura, as usual, were searching for food in the forest. Just as they were passing by a small pond, the sharp-eyed Laura spotted a huge eel. The two were instantly excited. EJ was eager to launch an attack, but Laura cautioned him to be careful. This was likely an electric eel. If he couldn't kill it with one strike, an electric eel of this length struggling could easily deliver a 500-volt discharge, which could easily incapacitate him. Furthermore, Laura also demanded that EJ attack the eel with reverence, because it was equivalent to the eel sacrificing itself to save their lives. In the wilderness, one should maintain sufficient respect for killing. EJ was somewhat dismissive.
I don't want him to die like that. Just give him a little bit of respect. This is our food. It's going to save our life.
Excuse me, Mr. Eel. Do you mind if I take this stick and shove it up your brain cranium so that I can eat you tonight?
He expressed his apologies to Mr. Eel with a slightly flippant tone, then promptly speared it through the head. Only after the eel was completely dead did he retrieve the now motionless eel. It was quite large. Such an eel should replenish a good amount of their energy. However, Laura didn't seem very happy, because she felt offended. She believed that EJ hadn't shown the eel sufficient respect. Laura stated that she wasn't opposed to killing, and she even praised EJ for his clean and efficient strike. But his attitude had hurt Laura considerably. She believed that in the wilderness, killing other animals to sustain one's own life was understandable, but one should maintain due respect for them. The joy of obtaining food was instantly washed away for EJ. He was somewhat at a loss. After the two discussed it for a while, they could only fall silent and first carry the prize back to camp. EJ kept thinking about this matter. Perhaps he had been too brutal when killing the eel, frightening Laura. This gentle older man, after the initial bewilderment, began serious self-reflection. It might have been his flippant language, combined with the brutal method, that made Laura feel he hadn't shown the eel enough respect. After all, from this woman's perspective, it was the eel that allowed them to survive. So, in her view, EJ seemed to be sarcastically mocking her. So, when the two had finished processing the eel and began roasting it, EJ still frankly expressed his apology. These two were people who entrusted their lives to each other. They couldn't become estranged over something like this. Therefore, EJ sincerely reflected on himself and offered Laura a genuine apology. In the afternoon, while they were still roasting the fish, the two were hit by a rainstorm. But even though the rain was heavy, Laura diligently crouched by the fire. This roasted fish was the only meat they had eaten in all this time. So, even with the rain beating down on them, they still happily enjoyed this plump eel. This single meal pulled them back from the danger line. By the 16th day, their current location was still 14 kilometers from the exit. There was less than a week left in the challenge. They had to start thinking of a plan now. Looking at the open water, the two discussed it and decided, let's build a raft and go across that way. The danger of traveling along the riverbank was simply too great. So, the two became busy again, gathering wood and assembling the raft. This task took them 2 full days. By the 18th day, through their diligent efforts, the raft had begun to take shape. However, Laura was very worried about EJ, since over these past 2 days, in order to build the raft, he had taken on most of the physical labor. In fact, the assembly and construction of the raft were almost entirely handled by him alone. This level of exertion places an enormous strain on the human body. Furthermore, because the journey was so long, it was very likely they would need to spend the night on the raft. So it wasn't just about making something that could float. EJ, with his maximized hands-on skills, had even fashioned 2 seats. But this series of tasks had nearly drained EJ of all his physical strength. After the boat was completed, the two still set off. Time moved forward to the 19th day. Although the raft was exquisitely made and sturdy, there were simply too many plants on the water's surface. The raft's propulsion relied entirely on the 2 paddles in their hands, but this simply couldn't effectively clear the plants ahead. Therefore, their actual travel speed wasn't fast at all. For the entire day, they were still struggling through the mass of vegetation, having not made it very far at all. After resting for the night, the two prepared to continue their journey. But EJ's condition was truly worrying. Already suffering from insufficient energy, the boat-building activity had directly pushed EJ into exhaustion. He was now showing signs of dehydration. But with the challenge nearing its end, EJ, relying on his strong willpower, boarded the raft and set off once more. Due to the obstructing plants, their speed remained very slow, yet they advanced steadily, inching forward bit by bit. By nightfall, the caimans all around them, and the distant storm, left them looking haggard. To avoid being attacked by the caimans, the two stopped moving, and chose a spot to rest. But while they could avoid the crocodiles, they couldn't avoid the storm. The two, having taken shelter, were continuously drenched by the pouring rain. EJ was already running on empty to begin with. At a time when his body was severely lacking energy, the rain was constantly sapping his body heat. This caused EJ to shiver uncontrollably. However, he was, after all, a man who could continue a challenge even with an infection. Gritting his teeth, he managed to endure this dangerous night. The next day, EJ, dragging his barely alive body, arrived with Laura at the lake where the exit was located. Hearing the growing roar from the sky above, they knew they had conquered the Amazon as well. These two experts, relying on their skills, restored the production team's honor. Even the Amazon jungle, which had taken out 3 challengers, could not stop them. After these 21 days of primitive living, EJ's score had risen to 9.1 points. The same was true for Laura. Both of these 8.2-point experts had broken through the 9-point barrier together. Using their willpower and survival skills, they successfully overcame the terrifying Amazon. There is a place like this. During the day, it's as hot as an oven. At night, it's piercingly cold. Over 80 species of snakes live here, including those capable of constricting prey twice their size. Madagascar is scorching, and there are also poisonous scorpions, tarantulas, black widows, and other deadly poisonous insects waiting for their chance. It can be said to be a harsh land filled with danger. This is a desolate island located 250 miles off the coast of Africa, Madagascar. The lack of food and fresh water makes it impossible for 99% of humans to survive here. Today, 2 survival experts have come here to undertake their 21-day survival challenge. The male guest is named Jeff. He is a devout Mormon. As a professional forest ranger and hunter, Jeff is very confident in his survival skills. Furthermore, his long life of hunting has made his views quite extreme. Jeff believes that God placed animals on Earth for humans to use as they please. He doesn't need to cooperate with nature for mutual benefit. He wants to fight nature to the end and conquer it. This combative man has a comprehensive rating of 7. The other female challenger is named Eva. She is a wilderness guide and also possesses extensive survival experience. Contrary to Jeff, this woman believes that nature is sacred and that humans need to cooperate with it, not use violence. Eva's comprehensive rating has also reached 7.2. The two are quite evenly matched. After being dropped off at the designated location by a pickup truck, the two quickly took off their clothes and headed towards the rendezvous point. Beside a small grove, Jeff and Eva met. The first meeting of every group is harmonious and humorous, and these two were no exception. After greeting each other, they began to confirm their initial items. Jeff had the fire starter, Eva had the knife, the best combination. So next, they had to look at their survival task. From the map, they had to start from this desert valley area, at the rendezvous point, traverse barren ravines and jungles, to find a suitable campsite, and search for water and food, to survive for 21 days. Then, cross 3 kilometers to reach the mesa. Not only that, they also needed to climb the cliff, and light a beacon fire at the mountaintop to call for rescue. The task was difficult, but both were full of drive. After identifying the direction, they set off directly. The first day is usually spent traveling, because they need to hurry, and find a suitable campsite first, before considering anything else. However, temperatures as high as 40 degrees caused them quite a bit of trouble. Not only the blazing sun, but also the scorching hot ground, made them miserable. As they walked, the two got to know each other, and disagreements quickly emerged. When passing by a small thicket, Eva discovered a bird's nest. Jeff immediately suggested taking it down and carrying it away, because using it to start a fire is quite convenient. But this made Eva a little unhappy. At this stage, it wasn't absolutely necessary for them. There was no need to start plundering from the very first day. So she began to dissuade Jeff. Unless needed, it could be left alone. The challenge had barely started for a day, and their viewpoints had already clashed intensely. In the end, Jeff took a step back, because he knew that for a long time to come, this woman's fate was tied to his own. So there was no need to let a bird's nest cause a rift between them. The two continued on their way, marching across this desolate land. However, after a short while, they discovered a cave. For them, needing to survive in the wilderness for a not-so-short period, this was practically a dream start. While other groups were still laboriously building shelters, they might have already started planning the next step. And even more surprisingly, right beside this cave was a small stream of water. Shelter and water source were both secured. It must be said, their luck was truly overflowing. However, a cave isn't something you can just move into casually. Not only do you need to confirm whether this is the den of some large animal, you also need to carefully clean out snakes, insects, and the like inside. For example, right now, Jeff saw in that slightly smaller cave below, small white balls. These were black widow eggs. This indicated that black widows lived near the cave. This kind of venomous creature, which could be said to kill upon contact, was no joke. Furthermore, its eggs could hatch at any time, releasing a bunch of small spiders. Jeff naturally began to consider how to eliminate them, but Eva objected. Facing something potentially life-threatening in the wilderness, she was still emphasizing that she disliked killing, and believed they shouldn't have intruded into another creature's living territory in the first place. Then, when Jeff suggested lighting a fire to smoke them out, she did not agree, but rather skipped over the topic, saying the main task now was to start a fire and boil water. Having been active all day in high temperatures, they were now in urgent need of replenishing water, so the two began to wander around, searching for materials. But, in this desolate desert environment, it's very hard to find tinder. The two worked hard all afternoon but couldn't find any suitable fire-starting materials. It was already dark, and they still hadn't succeeded. It seemed their first night would only be spent shivering in the cold. By the second day, Jeff was actually feeling a bit irritable. He tried not to think about the bird's nest matter, to avoid harboring resentment towards his companion. Moreover, because Jeff is a devout Mormon, he had made an agreement with his wife before coming out. One of the most important rules was not to hold their partner overnight. Therefore, last night, unable to huddle together for warmth, both of them were extremely cold. On the second day, the two spent the entire day searching for materials to start a fire and, in the meantime, looking for food. By evening, they finally succeeded in lighting a fire. Now they could finally drink water. The two eagerly used a boiling stone to scoop water and began boiling it. After being busy for 2 days, they finally had water to drink. This made Eva very satisfied. But during the night, Eva encountered something that made her blood run cold. Just as she was about to fall asleep, a scorpion actually crawled over her body. Terrified, with all her hair standing on end, Eva couldn't sleep for half the night. By the third day, this woman, who had repeatedly stated she didn't want to invade others' territory or kill, lit a torch and prepared to take action against the spiders in the cave. This made Jeff quite happy. The kid was finally starting to understand, so the two directly set a fire, burning all the spider nests. Now they no longer had to worry about being bitten by something in their sleep. Time moved forward to the 8th day. In the previous week, Jeff and Eva had hardly eaten anything, surviving only on water, but now, they had to start taking action to find food. Jeff was very glad that his hunter skills could finally shine. Fortunately, the two hadn't gone far when they encountered a snake. After discussing it briefly, Jeff directly flipped over the stone where the snake was hiding. Then Eva directly grabbed the snake with her bare hands. This snake made the two very excited. After all, this was their first meet in such a long time. The two returned to the cave joyfully. After processing the snake, they began a pleasant snake meat barbecue. It had already grown dark, but an unexpected situation occurred. At Jeff's insistence, they roasted the snake meat for a very long time. However, unbeknownst to them, such prolonged roasting had already shriveled the snake meat into charcoal. Eva tasted it. This thing was completely inedible. The snake meat was completely ruined by the roasting, losing all its nutritional value. So, after finally managing to catch a snake, it was now completely wasted. By the 13th day, nearly 2 weeks without eating had left them completely exhausted and running on empty. Jeff had even started experiencing dizziness and other symptoms, but having persisted for so long, they wouldn't give up easily. However, finding food in this barren desert was as difficult as reaching the heavens. Just seeing a small lizard could excite them for a long time. But these slippery little creatures are not easy to catch. It quickly burrowed into its hiding place in the stone crevice and refused to come out. So Jeff directly attacked the stone crevice where the lizard was hiding. Perhaps because he was too hungry, the frantic Jeff even hurt himself. This made Eva a little scared, because her companion, under the influence of hunger, was holding a stone and frantically attacking the lizard's hiding place. But this didn't have much effect. Feeling his physical strength draining rapidly, Jeff had to give up on catching this lizard. The two continued on their way, searching for food. But due to a misjudgment of their physical condition, by the afternoon, under the high temperature and scorching heat, Eva became dehydrated. So the two had to give up hunting and return to the cave to replenish water. The next day, because she had experienced mild dehydration once before, Eva had to stay in the camp to rest. Jeff alone set out on the path to find food. But this petty-minded man once again sought out yesterday's lizard. The small lizard was hiding in the hole, trembling with fear. Jeff was outside, holding a stone, and frantically pounding it. He even dug open the stone hole where the lizard was hiding. Through his unrelenting efforts, a small tail of the lizard was exposed. Then Jeff, grabbing the small tail, directly pulled the poor little lizard out. Still not venting his anger, he directly opened his mouth wide and bit off its head. Let's observe 3 seconds of silence for this little lizard. By evening, a piece of meat not even the size of a palm was enjoyed immensely by the two. Time moved forward to the 17th day. In over 2 weeks, they had only eaten one small lizard. That couldn't replenish much energy for them. So, the two still went out every day, searching everywhere for food. But luckily, the two spotted a large boa constrictor beside a small pond. This made Jeff's eyes turn red. Without another word, he ended the life of this large boa constrictor. Such a large snake, if the two didn't make any blunders, would allow them to comfortably last until the 21st day, with no problem at all. Jeff also learned from the last experience. After processing the snake meat, he prepared to smoke it. This way, it wouldn't be overcooked and could be preserved for a long time. The two immediately agreed and directly set up a simple smoking shed to start making smoked meat. However, another accident occurred. Late that same night, the two, awakened by the firelight, suddenly discovered their smoking shed was on fire. Although the fire was extinguished after frantic efforts, their things were gone too. The long-awaited smoked snake meat had also turned into a pile of ashes. The two were immediately filled with despair. But when Jeff, unwilling to give up, prepared to handle the giant boa's internal organs, they discovered several huge eggs. It was truly an unexpected surprise. There were actually several unlaid eggs inside its body. The two began roasting the eggs joyfully. This protein-rich food made them eat with tears in their eyes. The energy replenished this time was already enough for them to last until the final day. After the sun rose on the 21st day, Eva and Jeff had packed up and were ready to head towards the exit. Although they had eaten something, in reality, over the past half-month, the energy consumed by the two was completely disproportionate to the energy replenished. Add to that the scorching ground underfoot and the ever-present dangers around them that required constant vigilance. They were truly on the verge of their limits. Furthermore, after trekking a sufficient distance, they still needed to climb a section of cliff to reach the mountaintop. The difficulty of free solo climbing under such extreme hunger was simply astronomical. Moreover, the cliff made of tropical sandstone was quite rugged. It not only easily scratched the climbers' bodies, but also, if they accidentally fell, they could lose their lives. However, fortunately, this cliff wasn't completely vertical. The two carefully maneuvered along the edge and ultimately managed to climb to the summit of this small mountain. Then, they lit a beacon fire on the spot. Soon after, they heard the roar of an engine approaching from the distance. They had conquered the primitive life of Madagascar. The 11-day challenge was successfully completed. Over this half-month, these two challengers with opposing viewpoints not only conquered this barren land but also conquered themselves. Jeff's comprehensive rating increased to 7.3 points, while Eva's reached 7.4 points. Although they successfully completed the challenge, their actions of prioritizing personal beliefs over survival principles still had a significant impact on their comprehensive evaluation. Here is located at the westernmost end of the hurricane corridor in the Caribbean region. It can be said to be the most inhospitable area on Earth. Aggressive animals such as jaguars roam here. There are venomous jungles, ubiquitous terrifying swamps, and all kinds of deadly mosquitoes and insects. All these have turned this place into a veritable human exclusion zone, and just 5 days ago, a sudden heavy rainstorm triggered flash floods, turning some low-lying jungles into swamps, making this map even more challenging. Today, 2 survival experts are going to challenge this nightmare-like Belize. The man is named Cass, a retired soldier. He has a resilient spirit and rich survival experience, with an overall score of 7.2. The other female challenger is named Shannon. She is a survival instructor. Her professional and superb survival skills and rich knowledge of plants have enabled her to conquer countless dangerous places, with an overall score of 6.9 as well. This is still a well-matched team. Amidst the roar of the engine, the two arrived at the edge of the Belize jungle. After undressing crisply, the two challengers took big strides and walked towards the gathering point. In the vast jungle, 2 naked strangers, a thrilling survival journey is about to begin. After introducing themselves to each other, the two confirmed their initial items. Shannon brought a knife, while Cass brought a fire starter. This is still the golden combination for wilderness survival. According to the map, their current gathering point is in the southeast of the jungle. By walking north for about 8 or 9 kilometers, they can pass through the flooded jungle and reach a dry highland. Here, they need to find a way to survive for 21 days and then pass through a dark cave to reach the open space outside and wait for helicopter rescue. The challenge is very difficult, but neither Cass nor Shannon backed down. After confirming the direction, the two set off. It was still easy to move around the outskirts of the jungle. The two walked while getting to know each other. After all, they would need to rely on each other to survive for the next 3 weeks. Fortunately, both of them are friendly players with a strong team spirit. The atmosphere was harmonious along the way. Both Cass and Shannon had learned a lot about their teammate, but as they delved deeper into the journey, they gradually felt the ferocity of the jungle. The ground underfoot was now difficult to walk on. Not only were there various sharp plants, but also many snakes and insects hiding under the dead leaves, forcing them to slow down and proceed carefully. After spending some time, the two passed through the outskirts of the jungle and arrived at the depths of the jungle, which had become a swamp. Due to the heavy rain, countless snakes, insects, and predators had been forced to higher ground, and Cass and Shannon's destination was also one of the few highlands in this area. So there, they were likely to be neighbors with some terrifying animals. Moreover, the flooded jungle was even more difficult to walk through, because the pile of dead leaves itself required caution, let alone in this combination of deep water and dead leaves. One couldn't tell what would be stepped on with one foot. Halfway through, Shannon began to show her expertise as a plant master. When passing by an agave plant, Shannon wanted to get some leaves, because they might be useful to them. However, Cass, who was watching her work beside her, didn't think much of it, because in this kind of wilderness survival, one needed to weigh the pros and cons. Wasting a lot of energy for some agave leaves was quite unwise in his opinion. Besides, it was getting late. So after tearing off a few pieces, Shannon left under Cass's persuasion. But this also made Cass a bit worried, because in a 21-day survival challenge, if the two had different survival concepts, it would greatly increase the difficulty. But it was still too early to draw such a conclusion now. Cass still dutifully carried the things Shannon had gathered and continued walking. Soon, the terrain began to rise gradually. They had walked out of the swamp area, and as soon as they went up this small slope, the two were pleasantly surprised to find that there was a cave ahead. When encountering a cave during wilderness survival, it was truly a pleasant surprise. As long as it was confirmed that it was not the nest of some top predator, it would be the best shelter for survivors. It could shield them from the wind and rain, and save them the effort of building a shelter. Cass and Shannon explored inside it. Indeed, animals lived here. However, this cave was made of prehistoric limestone. In one corner of the cave, it was quite complex and deep. A long time ago, the ancient Mayans had explored this labyrinthine underground world, but many people who entered it never came out again. Cass and Shannon had no such conditions, not even any means of illumination. They were quite self-aware, and just walked around the vicinity a couple of times. Then they found a place to set up camp, at a flat and open spot near the cave entrance. As for survival, the top priority on the first day was to make a fire. Although they had a fire starter, due to the heavy rain scouring in the previous period, Cass still went through great pains before finally lighting a fire. Although he ended up looking rather disheveled, it greatly invigorated him. With the fire, not only could they drive away wild beasts at night, but they could also keep warm. As the sky gradually darkened, the two prepared to rest around the fire and experience their first night in the perilous jungle. When darkness descended upon this land, the creatures hidden in the dark became active. In the middle of the night, they began to be awakened by a noise. By the faint light of the fire, he only saw a pair of eyes shining with a dim light in the darkness. This scared him out of his wits. It wasn't until the next day when the sun rose that the two managed to get through that painful night. Cass had hardly slept at all, because not only was there the incident at that time, but also the mosquito and insect bites that he couldn't stand. Even now, there were still small ticks in his eyes, but that wasn't the worst part. Cass's most vulnerable male features had been attacked, which made him extremely angry, but there was nothing he could do about it. At noon, it had been more than 24 hours since Cass and Shannon started the challenge without any water intake. The human body will collapse after 3 days without water, but not everyone can hold on for 3 days. Not having water for 1 day can already cause physical discomfort, so their main task now was to find drinkable water sources. They hadn't considered the water in the forest swamps. That stuff pretty much contained the entire periodic table of elements. It was still dangerous even after boiling, so at Shannon's suggestion, they turned their attention to some plants. This plant master could identify plants that contained moisture, but even so, the few drops of liquid contained in those plants were just a drop in the bucket, completely unable to replenish enough water for them. It even consumed more of their physical energy, so the two returned to the campsite dejectedly. Since getting water from plants wasn't feasible, Shannon began to consider the accumulated water in the cave, because the water flowing down from the mountaintop was likely to pass through the cave, and after being washed against the rock walls, this water might be quite clean, but it also carried a large amount of calcium, which might cause kidney stones, and was somewhat risky to drink, but this was, after all, the only way. So after searching for water sources all day without success, the two started drinking this water dripping down from the stone walls. But compared to the danger of becoming dehydrated and getting into a critical situation, this risky behavior was worth a try. Time came to the 5th day. The two who had risked drinking the stone wall water didn't show any problems, which made them feel a bit relieved. But then came a new dilemma. They had hardly eaten anything these days. Now that the water source problem was solved, what they needed was food. This jungle was home to a wide variety of species, but for two human beings with bare hands, relying only on a knife and some spears made from sticks to catch prey was extremely difficult. Cass and Shannon had been hunting for several days, but had no shohua here at all. Even Cass had started to have ideas about howler monkeys, but that was really unnecessary. Monkeys, as social animals, could easily attract a whole group, not to mention the highly aggressive howler monkeys. A defenseless, naked human being, surrounded by monkeys in the wild, would only end up dead. So Shannon began to think of other ways, such as setting traps in the cave, in the hope of catching those cave creatures that they couldn't even see a trace of. But by the 6th day, the traps were still intact, but the bait was gone. The success rate of such primitive traps was extremely low. As for Cass, he was out chasing after the tracks of prey every day, but it wasn't easy. After several days, there was no progress at all, and in this kind of jungle, even if Cass saw a snake, it would be very difficult to catch it, because it could just twist its body and burrow into countless dead wood and fallen leaves, making it impossible to find again. Without replenishing energy for a long time, he was now almost unable to move. The accumulated fatigue and hunger caused a strong reaction in his body. And what's more troublesome is that it started raining again at this point. You should know, the rain in the rainforest doesn't stop in just a day or half a day. This sudden downpour signified that, in the coming days, not only would they be unable to go out hunting, but they also had to pay attention to keeping the firewood dry. For them, at this stage, this was making a bad situation worse. But even around the fire, their body temperatures were continuously dropping. In the wild, if the body temperature becomes too low, it basically means life-threatening danger. So all they could do now was conserve their physical energy as much as possible, maintain their temperature, and pray for the rain to stop. Beyond that, they had no other options. By day 10, the rain finally stopped. Over the past few days, not only had their condition worsened further, but their original stock of firewood was almost exhausted. And now, having just experienced a heavy rainstorm, finding dry firewood was even harder than finding food. This made Cass quite frustrated. However, seeing his teammate Shannon's condition, he felt it was all worth it, because compared to himself, he was more worried about the safety of this female teammate. If they couldn't find food soon, not only would he himself be in danger, but Shannon would definitely be unable to continue. Surviving alone in this kind of jungle is simply as difficult as climbing to the sky. So, in Cass's mind, teammate Shannon's safety was the top priority. But the situation was still not optimistic. After just one clear day, by day 11, it started raining again. This made both of them feel despair. So, as a last resort, they decided to explore the depths of the cave. But the pitch-black cave was already full of unknowns, and on top of that, they had almost no means of illumination. So this exploration yielded almost nothing. They only witnessed the eerie and terrifying aspects of the cave, as well as countless vicious bats. With no other choice, the two could only retreat. By day 14, they had both reached the point of being completely exhausted, their resources depleted. Cass still carried on as usual, searching for food and gathering firewood, but after 2 full weeks of fatigue and hunger, he was also about to reach his limit. This state of being physically drained can make a person become irritable, but Cass didn't get angry at Shannon, who had been out of sorts. Instead, he lay down somewhat resignedly. This also made Shannon worried, because since the challenge began, Cass had always been helping her. During the days when Shannon's physical strength was exhausted, he almost single-handedly took care of all the work. Now that Cass was drained, it was her turn to step up. The atmosphere in this team was really as good as it could possibly be. From the start of the challenge until now, the two had no disagreements or conflicts. They both cared deeply about their companion, were willing to devote themselves, were willing to give, were willing to care for each other. This kind of spirit, in a 2-person wilderness survival challenge, is extremely precious. But Cass had a minor flaw, because when Shannon managed to find a few snails, he thought it was a bit too little, and was unwilling to eat them. This wasn't him throwing a tantrum, because in Cass's view, these few snails were of no help to him, and he felt that Shannon might need these snails more. Time came to day 17. Shannon, already so thin she was just skin and bones, was still forcing herself to work. She was extremely weak. But for her own sake, and for her teammates' sake, she couldn't give up. However, she really was about to reach her breaking point. Seeing her suffering teammate, Cass stood up once again. Although he was also nearing complete exhaustion, his concern for his companion made him step forward. He used all his remaining physical strength for this final hunting attempt. This time, Cass encountered a giant python in an open area. This was the final hope, and as expected, this robust giant python became the first and only meat meal for Cass and Shannon in their 17 days of survival. Not only did it allow them to replenish necessary energy, but it also greatly boosted the morale of both. This pair of harmonious, mutually supportive challengers had seized hope. With this one full meal, the two easily managed to hold on until day 21. Next, they had to face the final perilous task, to traverse this deep, dark cave and reach the open ground on the other side. For them, who had struggled to survive for 21 days, this was clearly an immensely arduous task. The cave was pitch dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. There were all kinds of poisonous insects and countless bats. Relying only on the weak light from their handheld cameras, the two felt their way through the cave, stumbling along uncertainly. At one point, Shannon's handheld camera even accidentally broke. But with the close, seamless mutual assistance between the two, they still successfully made it out of this hair-raising dark space. They successfully reached the wilderness open space on the other side of the cave. Shortly after, accompanied by the roar of the helicopter had arrived above their heads. This also signified that the challenge was over. Through their own efforts and mutual help, they successfully endured the nightmarish 21 days. However, ultimately, the two had stubbornly endured by simply holding out against hunger. Therefore, Cass's overall score only rose to 7.4, Shannon's was only 7.1. But their attitude of mutual assistance and caring for their companion was the most precious thing. In this challenge, in the mountainous jungles of Nicaragua, two challengers are about to embark on a crazy survival journey. In this wild jungle, venomous fer-de-lance snakes and toxic wolf spiders lurk in the shadows, while fierce and ruthless cougars stroll through the jungle unabashedly. This is truly a perilous place. Hunger and ubiquitous dangers can drive a person insane. Can this unfamiliar man and woman successfully survive here for 21 days and successfully complete the ultimate task to reach the exit? This female challenger is named Jacqueline. She is a professional wilderness survival instructor and a vegetarian. Her hobbies are closely related to her work, so Jacqueline is very much looking forward to this challenge. And in simulation training, she received an overall score of 7.1. Her male teammate is named Adam, an experienced hunter. This man has a huge passion for the jungle and hunting, and is even proficient in the language of crocodiles. His overall score reached 7.3. Escorted by an off-road vehicle, the two arrived at the edge of the jungle. After stripping completely naked, the two plunged into the jungle. Soon, Jacqueline and Adam met at the gathering point. Both of them had lively and outgoing personalities, and quickly became familiar with each other through conversation. They confirmed their initial items. Jacqueline brought a fire starter, while Adam brought a knife. Then the two took out a map and began to confirm their task. According to the map, they needed to find a suitable tributary under the prominent waterfall to set up camp and then follow the terrain downhill to reach the exit on the mountain trail built by the local dragons. The two estimated the time based on the map and set off without delay. After all, sunset wasn't far away, and they needed to hurry up and find a campsite to build a shelter. Along the way, the two chatted as they walked, getting to know their survival partner, but to be honest, the two seemed to have labels that didn't quite fit together, because Adam came from a family of hunters, and hunting was his greatest interest. As for Jacqueline, she was a vegetarian who deeply respected nature. It has to be said that a vegetarian participating in a survival challenge is highly controversial. For now, the two were getting along not badly. Moreover, after Adam heard that his companion was a vegetarian, he started to have a mischievous plan to make her eat meat during this challenge. The innocent Jacqueline had no idea that her teammate had already started hatching bad ideas and was solemnly vowing that she wouldn't eat meat. As they talked and walked, the two were moving at a decent pace and soon reached the depths of the jungle. As they walked, they observed their surroundings, and Adam quickly identified a spot to set up camp, so they got busy. But before that, Jacqueline first made herself some clothes to cover her private parts. This harmonious way of getting along made both of them feel very comfortable. With their full concentration, when the sun began to set in the west, their shelter was roughly completed. But as the sky darkened, a storm began to brew, and because they had been busy building the shelter, they had no time at all to start a fire. When night fell, the heavy rain arrived as expected. Without a fire, and with a shelter that wasn't waterproof, Adam and Jacqueline spent their first night of this survival challenge, shivering and huddled together in the cold. Moreover, with this rain, they probably wouldn't be able to find many dry pieces of firewood. Given this situation, even if it didn't rain tomorrow, starting a fire would still be a problem. This initial setback left both of them quite dejected. On the second day, although the rain had stopped, the situation was still not optimistic. Because they had been soaked by the rain all night, they urgently needed to keep warm now. But after a recent rain, it was quite difficult to find dry firewood in the damp jungle. And not only was the cold a problem, without a fire, they also couldn't boil and disinfect river water. Drinking raw water in the wild was tantamount to gambling with one's life. But fortunately, Jacqueline quickly lit a fire using a bird's nest and some tinder. Adam quickly found bamboo tubes to fetch water. But then another accident happened. Because the firewood wasn't dry, they could only use some tinder and small pieces of wood to maintain the campfire. Although this wouldn't cause the fire to go out, it also couldn't make the campfire burn more vigorously. Of course, this meant they couldn't boil the water. Their enthusiasm was dampened again. But at this moment, Adam turned his gaze toward the nearby waterfall. Generally, water that flows so fast and washes over rocks is relatively clean, but Jacqueline was a bit worried, because although the waterfall didn't seem far away, it should actually be about 3 kilometers away in reality. However, Adam was very determined. They had no way to boil water to drink on their own at the moment, so they decided to rest for a day and head straight to the waterfall with full energy the next day. On day 3, the two got up quickly. They needed to go to the waterfall today to replenish their body's water. The human body would collapse after 3 days without water, and organs would gradually stop working after 2 days without water. Jacqueline was already showing mild symptoms of dehydration at this point, but with her tenacious spirit, she kept following behind Adam. Adam, who was clearing the way ahead, was actually very worried about his teammate's condition, because she looked extremely weak. But once they reached the waterfall, their dilemma would be solved. So Adam cleared the way, while constantly encouraging Jacqueline. Although they stumbled along the way, Jacqueline, with Adam's encouragement, successfully arrived at the foot of the waterfall. The water here, having been washed by limestone, was basically drinkable directly. The two parched bodies were relieved. Then, time came to day 4. After getting through the water crisis, they now needed to consider food. Of course, Jacqueline was a vegetarian, so she didn't plan to eat any meat. Although her body was also craving protein, Jacqueline didn't want to break her rule. When Adam caught some small snacks, like crabs, earthworms, and snails, she just watched without eating herself, but didn't ask Adam not to eat them either. That was what a true vegetarian was like. Adam tempted her several times beside her, but Jacqueline remained firm in her original intention and didn't waver. Adam didn't force her either, because he knew there was still a long time ahead. On the night of day 8, when the two were huddled together for warmth in the cold, they were suddenly awakened by a strange noise. Although they knew there was something near their campsite, with only the faint light from the handheld camera, they couldn't see anything clearly at all, so they could only stay on guard, and remained sleepless all night. On day 9, the two, still shaken, began to consider safety issues. Adam planned to make some weapons first. The most suitable and convenient weapon in the wild was a spear, so he sharpened a wooden stick, and then started today's work with Jacqueline. Moreover, Jacqueline also came up with an idea. Since they were going to act separately, they should agree on a signal, using this strange call, to indicate their current position to each other. If they called 3 times in a row, it would mean they were in danger. Not long after Adam went out, he saw a very dangerous footprint. This place was quite close to their campsite, which made him quite nervous. On the other side, Jacqueline discovered something good, a cave deep in the jungle. This was an unexpected pleasant surprise. So after Adam confirmed there were no wild beasts in the cave, he and Jacqueline moved their campsite into the cave. This place, which could shelter them from the wind and rain, was very important to them. Not only could it spare them from the wind and rain, but it also allowed them to stay in a dry place all the time. However, just as the two were moving their campsite, a rather terrifying thing happened. Right in the middle of their moving path, there was a fer-de-lance snake lying there. If they didn't see it and stepped on it, they would basically lose half their lives. So, Adam, startled, quickly moved. This not-so-big fer-de-lance snake luckily became Adam's dinner for the day. The two set up their new campsite in the cave, and then lit a fire. Adam started to deal with this reckless snake that blocked their way, skinning it and removing its internal organs. Jacqueline also came to help, but this situation made her, who had never killed any living thing before, wrinkle her brow. Soon, the snake was processed into a piece of smooth snake meat, a white and tender section, like a cream sausage, and under the roasting of the flame, it soon began to emit a greasy and fragrant smell. Adam, while enjoying this rare meat meal, didn't forget his original intention and continued to tempt Jacqueline. But at this time, Jacqueline still had some supplies in her body and didn't take the snake meat that Adam passed to her. Then, when night fell, as they were resting in this new campsite, they realized things weren't that simple. This cave was dry, cool, and sheltered from the rain. But they weren't the only ones who fancied this place. There were also countless other insects and small animals. So as soon as it got dark, when Adam and Jacqueline were preparing to rest, the cave instantly became lively. These large and terrifying insects made it completely impossible for the two to sleep, especially those strangely shaped spiders, made Jacqueline break out in goosebumps all over. After a very restless night passed, both of them, not having rested well, were a bit low on energy. Even though it was now daytime, they still chose to continue resting in the cave during the morning. And even worse, when Jacqueline went out to work, she realized she had unexpectedly gotten her menstrual period. Normally speaking, when a woman is on her period, it's a time when she needs nutrition. Not only was she a vegetarian, but she was also currently participating in a survival challenge. Even eating her fill was a problem, let alone getting enough nutrition. And when night came, the two still huddled together by the fire for warmth, preparing to rest. But they had only slept for a short while, when they were awakened again by a sudden noise. Tonight was yet another sleepless night. Without any means of illumination, they had no idea what was lurking around their campsite. On day 12, while Adam and Jacqueline were lighting a fire, they spotted a beast darting past, but they couldn't recognize what it was at all. However, judging by its size, it wasn't some large predator, so Adam planned to catch it and bring it back to camp, to have a hearty dinner. Therefore, this experienced hunter observed for a period of time. Then at the openings of some tree hollows, he used tinder, bird nests, and such to create smoke. Thick smoke drifted out from the hollow openings, and for a while, smoke began to drift everywhere. It seemed quite unlikely that they would be able to catch it now. Time came to day 14. Jacqueline, who had been eating only plants for 2 weeks, was nearing her limit. After all, she had been working constantly, and hadn't consumed enough energy, plus she was on her period. Life was truly miserable. So, a vegetarian participating in a survival show is really at a disadvantage. But Adam was a voracious meat eater. Jacqueline, whose body was nearing its limit, lay in the campsite. She completely didn't want to move anymore. But Adam could work while chatting with her, making her happy. Halfway through the challenge, the atmosphere between these two was still surprisingly harmonious. On day 17, the two people, starving and dizzy, began their final hunting operation. With a hint from Jacqueline, Adam caught a small lizard. Jacqueline still couldn't accept the act of killing, so she quickly moved away. However, When Adam roasted this small lizard over the fire, he knew the time had come. He began to extend his claws towards Jacqueline. Given the current situation, it was time to train this well-behaved vegetarian to eat meat. With a wicked smile on his face, Adam handed a lizard leg over to Jacqueline. Although her reason was screaming, "Don't eat it, don't eat it," the depletion of her body and the nearing end of the challenge forced her to slowly extend her hand. In order to overcome herself, to conquer this jungle, Jacqueline finally took her first bite of meat. Adam, watching from the side as Jacqueline overcame herself, revealed a gratified smile. By day 19, Adam was no longer satisfied with just making Jacqueline eat meat. This man, who had lost his mind, actually started making Jacqueline kill living creatures. The two lay on the mountaintop, talking freely about anything, but ultimately, Adam did it to make Jacqueline stronger. Over the course of these more than 2.5 weeks, this man and woman with excellent personalities had already established a deep friendship. As the first red glow of light appeared on the horizon, the 21st day had arrived. They now had to trek 10 kilometers down the mountain and find that mountain trail. This was an arduous challenge for both of them. After packing up a bit, Adam and Jacqueline encouraged each other and set off on the journey to leave. This long journey was quite difficult for two people whose physical strength was nearly depleted. Moreover, they had to watch out for hidden dangers along the way, such as snakes and various poisonous insects. However, the previous 20 days had already proven their resilient spirit. The two encouraged each other, supported each other, and finally, through a patch of grass, they saw the flat yellow road. The two rushed down excitedly, then climbed onto a passing car, and the challenge ended there. After these 21 days of survival, Adam's overall score rose to 7.8 points. Jacqueline's score rose from 7.1 to 7.5 points. In the southern part of the Pacific Ocean, there lies an island. On the surface, it appears to have beautiful scenery, but in reality, it is a bona fide human-restricted zone. In the shallow sea, just dozens of meters from the shore, there are countless greedy blacktip reef sharks and whitetip reef sharks. And, in even closer shallow bays, there lurk highly venomous sea snakes. On the white sandy beaches, the daytime temperature can even reach 40 degrees Celsius. Moreover, typhoons that can sweep across the entire island visit from time to time. This is Fiji. Now, two brave challengers are going to engage in a 21-day primitive survival challenge in this place. The female challenger is named Alana. She is a successful career woman, but she is strong-willed and obsessed with wilderness survival, so she is quite confident about this challenge. However, when it comes down to it, her overall rating is only 6.1. The male is named Keith. He is an ex-serviceman, and now a professional alcohol and drug rehabilitation instructor. He has a great passion for outdoor activities, and possesses an extremely tenacious spirit. But for him, the difficulty of this challenge might be the only thing in his life that can rival that of a drug rehabilitation center. His overall rating reaches 6.3. A speedboat transported the two challengers to an offshore shoal, where their clothes were confiscated. The two, completely naked, with curiosity about their fellow companion, set off on the path to the gathering point. Under a coconut tree, Keith and Alana met. After exchanging greetings, the two found their initial items nearby. Keith had a knife, while Alana had a fire starter. The best combination needs no further elaboration. Finally, the two also found a map. It marked the tasks for their current challenge. According to the map, they were currently in a wasteland by the seaside. They first needed to walk through the wild jungle to reach the other side of the island. On the beach there, they were to find a suitable place to set up camp and search for resources to survive. After 21 days, they needed to cross the eastern side of the island, pass through an area infested with stingrays and sea snakes, go through the jungle, and then climb up the steep volcanic rocks. The exit was located at the top of this mountain. After confirming the route, the two set off immediately. On the first day, they needed to traverse the island, so time was relatively tight. As soon as they hit the road, they realized how terrifying the temperature on this island was. It felt like they were being placed inside an oven. After entering the jungle, the two not only had to pay attention to the waist-deep grass, but also be careful of the ubiquitous poisonous insects in the tropical rainforest. As they advanced, the clouds in the sky churned and surged. The weather here could change in an instant, so they had to hurry up even more and find a good place to build a shelter. Soon, the two arrived at the beach on the opposite side of the island. After patrolling the surroundings, the two found a seemingly great spot and prepared to set up camp. It was a certain distance away from the beach, and there was a pool right beside it. Boiling water was quite convenient. Now it was time to start a fire. Keith said that the fire starter was in Alana's bag, so it would be best if she did it herself. Alana didn't have a smooth time starting the fire. Things on this island were extremely damp. It took a great deal of effort to ignite them. After quite a while, when Keith had already given up hope, Alana finally lit the fire. So Keith quickly brought back a pile of dry firewood and took 2 buckets to fetch water. Their method was to throw heated stones into bamboo tubes and use the scalding stones to purify the bacteria and viruses in the water. However, this method didn't work. Even though they had thrown in many scalding hot stones, the water in the bamboo tubes wasn't hot. It was just lukewarm. This was the optimal temperature for bacteria to multiply. Obviously, such water couldn't be drunk, but currently, the two hadn't thought of any other way to purify the water source. Moreover, it was getting late. Even though they hadn't succeeded in drinking water, they had to get moving and build a shelter large enough for the 2 of them. It wasn't until night fell that they barely managed to put up a shed. Although they didn't get to drink water today, overall, the first day went relatively smoothly. On the second day, they still faced the same problem. They had to find a way to get water, otherwise, their situation would get worse and worse. The 2 entered the jungle while searching all the way. Keith unexpectedly discovered banana trees here. Theoretically speaking, if you cut down a banana tree and hollow out its center about 10 to 20 centimeters above the ground, it would gradually fill up with water. But when he rolled up a banana leaf into a straw and took a sip, his whole face wrinkled up. The taste of this water was simply sour and pungent, like electrolyte solution. After Keith took this sip, he felt even thirstier than before. Obviously, this method didn't work. The 2 began to think of other ways. Not long after, they set their sights on coconut trees again. But this time, a disagreement arose between Alana and Keith, because Keith wanted to chop down the coconut tree directly. In this way, they would get a large pile of coconuts. Alana obviously didn't want to do it like this. It would consume a huge amount of physical strength for no good reason. This was a last resort method. Right now, she still wanted to see if there were other ways. However, Keith went his own way and just went over to chop the tree without a second thought. This made Alana quite annoyed, because she thought Keith had many ideas that were too ambitious. Wilderness survival shouldn't be like this. At this stage, they needed to conserve as much physical strength as possible. On the second day of the challenge, a strategic disagreement emerged between the 2. By the afternoon, Keith, who had been busy for a long time, finally got what he wanted. He chopped down the huge coconut tree. But the bad thing was, although these coconuts looked large in size, they were actually green coconuts. When unripe, there was no water inside these coconuts. In other words, Keith's big project was all in vain. Not only did he expend a large amount of physical strength, but he also got no return. This made him quite dejected. On the third day, Keith, who had consumed a large amount of physical strength, was now in urgent need of replenishing water. The 2 went into the jungle again to look for something drinkable, but until the afternoon, they even reached the beach on the other side, yet they didn't find any suitable water source. However, on some reefs in the shoal, Keith found some small puddles. This accumulated water looked very much like rainwater. Alana was immediately tempted at that moment. After all, it looked quite clean. So without saying a word, she took a sip. Then Keith also took a sip. Having finally found drinkable water, the 2 drank a lot, and then returned to the camp contentedly. But in the evening, it started to rain. It should be a small air current that visited the island again. The dense rain lasted until the 5th day. The 2, who had been hiding in the shed for a long time, finally could come out and move around. Alana continued to collect rainwater with bamboo tubes, but Keith came over and told her that he seemed to have diarrhea. As for the reason, it should be the water they drank 2 days ago. But Alana said that she didn't have any abnormalities at all, so it shouldn't be a big problem. She would get better soon. Despite being comforted like this, Keith's condition was not optimistic at all. He didn't want to move at all now, because the abdominal cramps had made him feel like vomiting. So Alana took on the following work. Although she didn't want to do all the work alone either, she didn't want her companion to drop out because of this. Because for this kind of challenge, one person absolutely couldn't complete it alone. But on the 6th day, Keith still got the idea of dropping out, because these past few days had made him suffer terribly. He felt that his body couldn't hold on at all. Regarding Keith's idea of dropping out, Alana could only try to ease his anxiety and ask him to try to hold on for a few more days, slow down and do some light work. After some persuasion, Keith gave up the idea of leaving immediately. He decided to hold on for a few more days and see. So the 2 entered the jungle again. Their task today was just to repair the shelter. They didn't need to do anything else. And when Keith was chopping banana leaves, he unexpectedly found a large bunch of green bananas. This was an unexpected food source. Both of them were invigorated by this. This bunch of bananas made Keith firm up his determination again. By the afternoon, Alana had also made a fishing trap. They excitedly went to place the cage, expecting to catch 1 or 2 big fish in a few days. Over this period of time, both of their bodies had been almost drained. What they needed most now was to replenish nutrients. However, when they thought the time was right and went to retrieve the fishing cage with high expectations, they were hit again because the cage was empty. There was nothing inside. The situation was getting worse and worse. Time came to the 8th day. It hadn't rained these past few days, so the temperature remained high. Not only that, even the pool with clean water that they relied on for survival was about to dry up. Without food to replenish physical strength, and facing the danger of complete dehydration, it was really adding insult to injury. The two started praying for rain, and then chopped bamboo to make water containers. But even for this relatively easy task, Alana couldn't hold on, because she was already showing signs of dehydration. She was dizzy and weak, and even her vision was blurry. This wasn't just due to dehydration. You see, in the past 8 days, they had almost eaten nothing. Alana's body had long reached its limit. Add to that, the high temperatures and sun exposure these past few days, it was normal for Alana's body to have problems. On the 11th day, they couldn't sit still anymore. Even though their bodies were constantly warning them, they had no choice. They could only drag their tired bodies out to find food. But without tools, it was incredibly difficult to find anything to eat on this desolate beach. For example, Keith finally saw a crab in a crevice between the rocks, but after he managed to get it out, he couldn't catch it at all. The two worked hard all day, ran half the beach, and had no results. And right in a reef area, Keith actually saw a deadly sea snake, but they were so hungry that they didn't care about anything else. Keith attacked the sea snake with a knife, but the sea snake was extremely flexible in the water. Under Keith's attack, it was only injured. This man's plan was once again in vain. But Alana had opinions about Keith. She thought there were still many crabs on this beach. There was no need to provoke the sea snake. In Alana's eyes, this was Keith's foolish behavior of forcefully showing his manly side. The atmosphere between the two began to become awkward. After bringing back a few crabs, they had a heated argument. In the past few days, they had accumulated a lot of resentment towards each other. For example, Alana thought Keith was simply too whiny, and he always did very foolish things, like chopping down the coconut tree at the beginning, to attacking the sea snake now. But in Keith's view, Alana was the one who whined the most. No matter what he did, Alana would always criticize him. He was already close to breaking down. After the argument, the atmosphere between the two became abnormally silent. However, that night, Keith's body started to have problems. He not only started vomiting, but also showed symptoms of cramps, so the production team had to intervene and urgently sent Keith to the hospital for treatment. After a checkup, Keith's condition wasn't optimistic. He could only continue to be hospitalized for observation, so his challenge ended on the 11th day, and now the island was left with only Alana. Although losing her companion was a huge blow to her, she didn't give up at all. She had to put in her full effort here. Even alone, she had to complete the challenge. To be honest, the power of team spirit is truly boundless. Alana took on all the work alone. She repaired the safety shelter, sought out water and food, and even made a wooden spear to hunt small sharks in the shallow water. But even these small fish weren't something she could bully. After working hard all day, she had nothing to show for it. And on the evening of the 14th day, Alana was awakened by a strange noise. It seemed like an animal had been by her side for a long time. But without any lighting, she couldn't see anything. This made her extremely anxious. And in the past few days, she had only eaten a few bananas. Her condition was getting worse and worse. She couldn't hunt. Alana could only look for small crabs to eat on the shore. In this way, it was the 19th day. Alana could no longer move. She could only lie down, choosing to maintain her life with her own body's energy. And she lay there for 2 days. When the sun rose again, it was already the 21st day. Even though Alana's internal energy had been almost depleted, she still forced herself to stand up and prepare to go to the exit. According to the plan, Alana needed to go around the entire island, then pass through a very dangerous shallow area, and finally climb up the volcanic rock to the top. It looked like quite a tough journey, but this was the end. Even if it was extremely difficult, Alana still staggered forward alone with her stick. Around 5 p.m., Alana finally reached the top by relying on her belief. Hearing the helicopter's roar, she knew her challenge was over. Due to her strong willpower, her score reached 7. Here is the hinterland of South America, a place sandwiched between the Andes Mountains and the Amazon rainforest. Its climatic conditions are as extreme as its geographical ones. The exceedingly high humidity and temperature make it hard to breathe, and tropical rainstorms often visit. Almost every time, they trigger massive flash floods. Here also live lancehead vipers and pumas, as well as countless venomous insects. No matter how you look at it, this is not a place suitable for human survival. This is Bolivia. Today, 2 challengers have come here. They will survive naked in this dangerous land for 21 days. The female challenger is named Sabrina, a full-time mother. who is deeply interested in wilderness survival and possesses rich survival skills. Her overall score is 6.7. The male challenger is Vincent, with superb wilderness survival experience. His overall score reaches 8.2. Finally, a big shot with an 8-point starting score appears again. After being dropped off at the foot of the mountain by an off-road vehicle, the two left their clothes behind and ventured into the jungle towards the meeting point. Beside the riverbank, Vincent and Sabrina met. The two, meeting for the first time, chatted happily. After some idle chatter, they began to confirm their initial equipment. Vincent brought a fire drilling kit, while Sabrina brought a small axe. Both were very useful tools. So next, they needed to understand the survival tasks for this trip. Starting from the meeting point, following the current river northwest, they could enter a rural-type canyon. Here, there was an extremely large waterfall and abundant resources. When they survived until the 21st day, they would need to follow the river for another 8 kilometers, cross rugged mountain paths and dense jungles, to reach the small slope where the exit was located. After confirming the route, the two headed downstream along the river. Vincent's rich survival experience soon came into play. Along the way, he explained many survival tips to Sabrina, such as a type of red wild fruit by the water that could be eaten, and how applying mud to their bodies and heads would protect them from sunburn. After all, the sun overhead was scorching, but Sabrina found it a bit annoying, because she already knew these tips, but just hadn't acted on them. Originally, the challengers were supposed to reach the campsite on the first day, but by the time the afternoon sun set, Sabrina and Vincent had not successfully arrived. The high temperature and sun exposure at the waterfall made them miserable, so they decided to build a temporary shelter first and rest for the night, continuing their journey the next morning when it was cooler. With an axe, a simple shelter was quickly erected. The two rested for the night. The next day, the two continued along the river, but even in the morning, the temperature here was frighteningly high. In such a hot environment, their body's water consumption was quite rapid. However, the river flow was quite slow, and it was impossible to drink the water, which likely contained countless parasites and bacteria. Now, they could only reach the campsite as soon as possible, start a fire, and boil the water to drink. Otherwise, they could fall into a dangerous situation of dehydration at any time. By noon, the high temperature and lack of water caused Sabrina to collapse. She now not only felt dizzy, but also had mild vomiting. These were symptoms of dehydration and heat stroke. Seeing his suffering teammate, Vincent found some eucalyptus leaves. This bitter-tasting plant could soothe Sabrina a bit. After chewing a few pieces, Sabrina indeed felt much better. They couldn't delay any longer, and had to hurry up and continue their journey. But soon, Sabrina heard the rumbling sound of water. Stepping out to look, the huge waterfall was already in front of her. At this moment, she was overjoyed. They had finally successfully reached the campsite. Looking at the towering waterfall and the deep pool below, Sabrina rushed over like a wild child. The two relaxed in the pool for a while before remembering that what they needed most now was to drink water. Although the waterfall flowed quickly, its source came from the river above, posing a high risk of contamination. However, Vincent noticed another tributary beside the waterfall, with water seeping through moss and limestone, dripping down like rain. This water was likely clean, but he couldn't guarantee it was drinkable. But in survival, one had to take some risks. So the two found leaves to collect water, and after a few big gulps, they felt much better after replenishing their water. Next, they need to find a place to build a shelter. This waterfall is surrounded by nearly vertical cliffs, forming a bowl-shaped valley enclosed by them. There is only one exit, though it looks quite safe. However, if a flash flood occurs, this place would be the most dangerous. But after wandering around, the two still chose to build a shelter inside the valley. After all, the conditions here were too good. By the afternoon, although the shelter was not yet complete, their top priority was to start a fire. Sabrina couldn't help worrying when she thought about this, because compared to a lighter, Vincent chose the most primitive stick combination. But since the other was an 8-point expert, he quickly proved himself with his actions. Even without bowstrings, he lit a fire in a short time by rubbing his hands together. This proficient technique immediately impressed Sabrina, but as time passed, the sky gradually darkened, and thunderstorms might soon visit. Although it didn't rain at night, the two were still freezing cold. The temperature difference between day and night was too great, and the strong winds made their shelter useless. So on the third day, they prepared to improve the shelter, at least covering the bottom to prevent wind leaks at night. However, when they started working, Sabrina again expressed annoyance towards Vincent, because this man talked too much, and every time he spoke, his work would stop. This made Sabrina feel that Vincent was like a boss, sitting there directing everyone. This made her very unhappy. Although the shelter was successfully repaired in the end, the atmosphere between the two gradually cooled down. On the 5th day, as soon as it was dawn, Vincent quietly left the camp alone. Of course, he wasn't abandoning Sabrina to run away. He was preparing for his own hunting expedition. As for why he didn't bring Sabrina, Vincent himself realized that his companion was very annoyed by his talkative nature, so he decided to hunt alone, so he wouldn't have to talk to anyone or worry about others' emotions. By the afternoon, after searching for food for a long time, Vincent found a chick just starting to grow feathers. For this small life, anyone would feel compassion, but now in the wilderness, to survive and fill their stomachs, Vincent had to take the chick. However, when he returned to the camp, Sabrina worried about his sudden departure. In her view, this behavior was completely unreasonable. But considering he brought food, Sabrina didn't complain much. On the 8th day, except for the bird they ate 2 days ago, they hadn't eaten any meat. The body, lacking protein for a long time, was already feeling fatigued, so Vincent went out hunting again. But at this time, Sabrina was at home making 5-pointed star wreaths to pray for Vincent. But these actions annoyed Vincent when he returned from hunting. Not hunting was bad enough, but also setting up strange wooden things at the camp. So, under Vincent's complaints, they moved the wood out of the camp again. This made Sabrina even more sad. The gap between the two was growing larger. On the 10th day, both, lacking protein for a long time, almost had no strength left. Vincent made a simple spear to find fat fish in the river. Sabrina continued to cheer for him as usual. Moreover, she felt they should go into the forest to hunt, instead of staying in the river. On the 11th day, the situation became increasingly worse. Not only did they fail to find meat for a long time, but dark clouds were gathering in the sky, accompanied by thunder. They knew a heavy rain was inevitable. They were worried about their camp, because if a flash flood occurred, this valley would be the most dangerous place. On the 12th day, the rainstorm arrived as expected. The two had to huddle in the camp, maintaining their body temperature with the fire. Moreover, without energy replenishment for a long time, they became incredibly weak. Worse still, the situation outside was even worse. The waterfall had grown much larger, the pool became murky, and the water level kept rising. They were very worried about their camp. On the 15th day, the rain had stopped, but Vincent's condition was not good. He had been lying in the camp for a long time, which made Sabrina very worried. By night, Vincent's condition worsened. In desperation, the production team intervened. However, under the medical team's examination, although Vincent was dehydrated, malnourished, and overfatigued, with his insistence, his condition was not bad enough to terminate the challenge. The next day, Vincent, who had barely survived the night, decided to quit, because he didn't know how much physical strength he had left. Perhaps one day, perhaps 3 or 4 days, but he still had to hike far to the exit. This was clearly impossible. So, after some thought, Vincent quit. The camp was left with Sabrina. Because of her promise to her husband before coming, she didn't plan to give up. On the 18th day, Sabrina had slowly overcome the pain of losing her teammate, but wilderness survival alone was very tough. So Sabrina even made a stone to chat with herself. Apart from necessary water intake and adding firewood to the fire, she hardly moved. But now, there was no one to go out and find food for her, so Sabrina gave up praying in the camp and left with her homemade wooden spear to forage. After a busy day, she unexpectedly found a parrot's head and returned. Although there wasn't much meat, it was at least something Sabrina had brought back. In the past 10 days, on the 20th day, Sabrina was on the verge of giving up. Her stomach began to hurt severely. This kind of emergency situation, that could make an adult curl up on the ground and cry, led the production team to intervene. After diagnosis, Sabrina's cause of pain was unclear, but it was likely acute infection, or severe food poisoning, or even appendicitis. So the challenge was called off. Sabrina was taken to the ambulance by the production team and rushed to the hospital. Afterward, doctors began to carefully examine the cause of Sabrina's stomach pain. After ruling out appendicitis, the hospital suggested observation, because the 20 days of survival challenge had left his body with most of its resistance lost. Thus, Sabrina's challenge ended on the 20th day, just 1 day away from completion. Meanwhile, Vincent had already contracted 3 severe tropical diseases, including the extremely deadly Wuchereria bancrofti malaria, so it seemed he quit on the 16th day. But in reality, this man had been struggling here for nearly a month. Both were defeated by this cruel rainforest. However, Sabrina's overall score, due to her persistence, rose to 7.5, while Vincent's dropped to 7.1.